Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Firefighters podcast, where we seek to develop, inspire, and motivate the world of the emergency services operator through a series of wide-ranging conversations. Now, before we go any further, just hit that rate, follow, or subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening to. It's a key performance indicator for us and helps us reach even more people. Now, here's what we've got for you today. Ladies and gents, boys and girls, it is my extreme pleasure to finally be able to announce the release of our first ever mobile app, Drillbook. Drillbook is built to be the home of training ideas for drill grounds across the fire and rescue service all over the world. The goal of the app is to deliver a community-built library of content built by firefighters for firefighters. You will find an area in there specifically with all of the instant debriefs. So if you're a big fan of the instant debriefs that we do on the podcast, you can go in there specifically and look at one area where they all kept. There's quick reference guides, there's interview questions, tactics, training, guidance, and you have the ability as well to put in all of your fantastic training ideas. What's that great drill you've done on station? What's that one you saw when you were covering somewhere else? Bang that into the app and share it with the whole world. So jump in there, have a look, input your own training ideas, and be part of a community-built library of content built by firefighters for firefighters all over the world. Go check it out. Ricky, welcome to the podcast, my man. How you doing?
Very good morning to you. Very good early morning to you, in fact.
So people don't always know, we always have a bit of a catch up before the sort of podcast starts. And you were saying earlier, you were like, freaking hell, dude, this feels kind of early. And maybe that's something I wanted to start with, because we were talking about it before we came on, about nurturing ourselves into the daylight, nurturing our mornings. And
I promise you, like 8 in the morning, Jesus, like before 8 a.m, you can expect me to probably just sit down with a brew and think about my life for a solid 45 minutes. I'm not ready to like converse and answer questions and do stuff. Yeah. At this point, you know what I mean? I'm just still.
Can we have an intellectual, articulate conversation at 7 a.m, please? Can you bollocks?
Exactly. Nah, this is just about doable, I reckon. I almost had a coffee before we started, but I thought the coffee's not going to help me here. Like the coffee's just going to make me talk faster, not cleverer.
I have to balance where my stimulation is at sometimes, because I'm a naturally excited dude and all this sort of stuff, but I'm a recovered addict and I used to take speed and I used to do this, and then I'm cross addicted and drank too much coffee and then did all the blooming nicotine gum and all that sort of stuff. So I have to be careful how excitable I get, because especially in the world of podcasting, I become a bad conversational partner because I get too excited and too jittery and I interrupt people.
Well, this is exactly it. I reckon a pint of coffee would have definitely got me more alert, but I'm not sure I've been talking any more sense. So instead you've got still slightly waking up tricky this morning, but I'm definitely happy to be speaking to you. So good morning.
So let's cycle back for a second. Maybe we should go there actually, because some people, especially your followership, so people won't know you've got a cool followership on social media platforms and stuff like that. They might know you predominantly for some of your athletic endeavors, and maybe we could go there first, because you're an owner of Gritstone CrossFit, or are you still a co-owner? Sorry.
Yeah, I know I'm the owner, sole owner of Gritstone CrossFit, which is 8 years old next month.
Congratulations. 8 years old. Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty good, right? And
made it through the pandemic. That was a crusher.
Made it through the pandemic. That was difficult in places, but to be honest, it was a fun challenge, and it really made us reset the whole business, and that's what we wanted from it. I say we because it is something that although I am the sole owner, it is a partnership and a collaboration with one of my best friends, Lee, and Anna, and a couple of other guys. And we really worked together. But the pandemic was good, because remember, me and Lee were going in every day, and we were running these bloody Zoom classes that were not what I started fitness to do, if I'm honest. But it was keeping people going, and it kept me going. It really was something that anchored my day, because there was nothing else that made your day purposeful otherwise. And then we fully refurbed the gym, and rather than get panicky about the gym closing and struggling, instead I reinvested a ton of money, and we totally refurbished the gym, bought a ton of new kit, and when people walked back in, it was like they'd walked back into a new training environment, and if anything, the gym's like done better from it, if I'm honest.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Gore-Tex Professional Fabrics. Now, we all know the working environment of a firefighter is filled with challenges. We face serious risks on the job, such as heat exhaustion, burns, physical and mental stress, and we frequently come into contact with high levels of toxic chemicals. Now, I have been wearing Gore-Tex for nearly 2 decades on the front line, working in hostile environments, tackling challenging incidents from firefighting to water incidents, and in urban search and rescue environments. Gore-Tex have a well-earned reputation for protecting professionals in the fire and emergency services through their family of highly innovative, waterproof, breathable moisture barriers that exceeds global performance standards and are trusted worldwide. Gore-Tex, going further together. What made you decide to sort of mentally and emotionally reinvest in something like that? Because that was the point where a lot of people were like, let's just go and run, let's just go and do something
No,
different, let's just go.
no,
And, with the greatest respect to them, it doesn't make them any better or worse of a person. But if everybody
no.
had done that, we'd have been in societally a bit of a shower of a shit place, really.
I would like to say that I'm a walking ball of optimism. I'm not a walking ball of optimism. But what I would say is that I felt it was the choice. That was the choice. But it was for me. It's go big or go home. If you know what I mean. I knew that the gym had to offer something better when it came back because the pandemic was affecting people's bank balances, affecting people's jobs. We didn't know what employment was going to look like. So I thought when the gym opens, it needs to offer more than it has previously. And the first chances is when you, like me and Lee were saying, when the gym closed to the pandemic, it's the first time the gym had been empty, an opportunity to do large scale operations and jobs in it since we'd opened. Because if we wanted to refurbish it from this point in the future, we're going to have to relocate for say 3 or 4 months, then clear the building out, and then come back into it. So we were like, we've got this great opportunity, and we just worked and we did it. And it meant that when people walked in, not only were they excited to be back, we felt like they were giving them like more than ever. And it was like a thank you for them paying all the way through, a thank you for them keeping the membership up and being part of the team, really, was that now you get this. And I think that it wasn't that I'm wandering ball of optimism at all, but it was definitely a feeling of go big and go home, and I wasn't ready for the night to end.
I was reading something yesterday because that aspect of purpose, and you mentioned it a couple of times there, but purpose of getting up and purpose of needing to be somewhere and structure to your day. And I was reading something yesterday, I forget who it was that wrote it, but it said that, we're designed to deal with the suffering, but it needs to be in the service of something. If you give a man a purpose and the ability to achieve it, they will literally crawl over broken glass to achieve something, but they've got to have that sense of purpose. We're like dopamine machines, aren't we? We have to feel like what we're doing means something.
In I think it's Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. That's a classic kind of finding from his work. He was a psychologist that ended up being held in one of the Jewish camps in the Second World War, and he kind of studied the behavior. And it was ironic, I suppose, that he found his purpose. He was saying in the book, he found his purpose in studying this situation because, like he said, you'll never have a situation like this again. And studying man's kind of like struggle for survival under the worst conditions. But he said, my favorite story from that is basically there was a guy and he had this thing in his head that he swore the war would be over by a given date. Say I can't remember the exact date. Say it was a Christmas 43 or something. And he just kept saying, we just have to survive till then. If we get till then, we'll be fine. If we get till then, we'll be fine. We'll see our families again. We'll see our families again. And because he had this purpose for staying alive, for fighting every single day, he did. And then it came to Christmas Day and the war wasn't over and he wasn't released. And I think it was within about 48 hours he died, didn't he?
So right. And cancer patients have it as well. If you tell them they've got 6 months to live, their body will begin to aim towards that. Those that believe they've got something else to live for. And like you say, his was, I need to tell people about what it was like. So he started documenting it all. And he knew that his documentation would be pointless if he wasn't alive to tell it. So that's what kept him surviving the entire camp, because he was going to tell the story. He was going to do the study.
I feel like when it came to all the kind of different things I've done, when I've run out of the feeling that I'm kind of pushing in a good direction or I feel like I'm really contributing anything significant, that's when it stopped. I was also in the Air Force for half a dozen years or so, and I did some good stuff, and I felt like we made some progress. I went to Afghanistan a couple of times, but the second tour of Afghanistan specifically, I felt like we did some really, really good work and really contributed to outcomes that meant something, that had like material, not material, that's the wrong phrase, but like true value. And then I came home and went to the next jobs, and I looked at the jobs that were coming down the line, and they just didn't feel like they were contributing at all. They felt like they were really treading water style kind of things. And the people were phenomenal. The people I was surrounded by were great. And I could spend another half dozen years just with great people. But because I was turning up to work in a job that I didn't feel was making that contribution, it felt a little bit empty. And so I left. And I think with Gritstone, why did I not close it during the pandemic? Because I felt like we have so much more good stuff to do. And I couldn't say the day was over just yet. But having said that, though, I've come into the fire service, and part of the reason I'm here is because I know I'm 38, so I'm like the world's oldest apprentice.
Fuck no, mate. We got people. So I run a lot of the whole time recruitments. We had people 45 join last year. It was wicked. Yeah.
Well, I think it's. I like it, but I mean, I'm off the older end of the spectrum, I suppose. And but that's because I think I ultimately I like the idea of learning stuff and contributing something. and I'll probably do this for the same period of time. You know, in the sense of when I feel like I've contributed something, I'll be time to look around. The thing about this job is I don't know if that day will ever arrive. My dad was I think 34 years a policeman, so you
Wow.
know it took him a long time to get
There's
to the end
so
of
much
that.
stuff there as I'm listening to you, and I'm trying to like take mental notes and listen to those bits there. But it's like, first one I wanted to ask you about when you were talking there. So why did you first join the Air Force and how old were you?
So I was, I think, about 23 or 24 when I joined the Air Force. Um, when I was a little boy, I used to go and live with a French family in Tours, and their father was the head of their jet fighter school.
Wow.
So
That just says
yeah, I had a
Top
really
Gun to me. I
bizarre.
just heard Top Gun there.
Well,
That's all I heard.
basically, yeah, Top Gun, essentially Top Gun. He used to teach. So basically, when these young pilots had kind of converted and learned to fly, I think it was the Alpha Jet at the time, he
Okay.
would take over them and teach them advanced maneuvers, and then teach them combat maneuvers. And he was a very
Dog fighting.
decorated soldier. Yeah, basically. And I didn't know this. I just went over to live with a family that were quite seemed quite well to do, I suppose. I
How
was
did that relationship happen then? Why were you going to stay with a French family, if I'm able
My
to ask?
parents used to send me to France for 2 or 3 weeks every summer, just to get some experience. I suppose my
That's
sister did the
wicked.
same. Well, I don't know if it felt like it at the time. All my friends were like playing
Yeah,
football in the park,
yeah.
and
At the
so I was
time,
with
you'd
this
be
French
like,
family.
why can't I just go and play at the local park? But
Yeah,
everyone's
exactly.
going down to the river, and we're just going to jump off the bridge.
Yeah, well,
But
that was not me. That was not me. So I remember I had a really weird experience where the lovely woman who was the mother who ran the house, she said to me one time, she said, "Do you have any like like a shirt or a tie or trousers?" And I was like, "No, I've got some nice clothes for dinner, but I haven't got any shirt and stuff." So she took me down to the shops and she bought me a shirt and tie and a jacket. And it was because the father was being promoted, and Jacques Chirac, who was president at the time, came to
yeah.
promote him, and I was stood in a line. I was in a line and I shook hands with Jacques Chirac, I believe, which I find hilarious. Like the president came to his promotion, I just happened to be there, this little English kid on a trip.
Tell you what,
But
though,
anyway,
let's just talk that family for a minute. I won't go down this rabbit hole for too long, but that must have been a really cool family. I imagine they would
oh yeah,
applied through local government to be able to do some sort of support or exchange
God knows,
program.
yeah.
Yeah. How
And then,
cool
well,
is that? You know what
it
I mean?
was so
Because
cool.
lots of people could do that, but it's a ball ache. I mean, like me and my
Yeah,
wife tried to foster 2 years ago, and it was like an 8 month process. It was so complex, and I feel
yeah,
bad for not having pushed it. We've got 3 kids and blah blah blah, but it's like
yeah,
it's hard to do. It's not like,
yeah.
oh, you're really wealthy, so it must be easy for those French people to do it. No, it's still probably difficult.
It's probably quite hard. Well, we did this wonderful trip, and then so I was around an Air Force base when I was younger. I remember he also was the first person who put me on a motorbike as well. We were driving past the motorway. There's a little motorbike park where you could go on a track, and he put me on a motorbike. And then as I grew up, I knew I wanted to be something in the Air Force because I remember I used to really enjoy meeting his friends and talking their conversations and listening to them. They'd always speak in English, which I found incredibly polite. That when friends came to visit, they'd speak in my language, so I could, even though I
Isn't
was a
that
young lad at
incredible?
11.
At that age as
Yeah,
well, even if you'd have had that self-awareness to realize this is an adult speaking for on my benefit in a different
yeah,
language. Not they're
yeah.
not just like, oh, the child in the corner. They don't know
No,
what they're on about.
it
That
was
is
incredible. And
such a show of character.
yeah, I mean, they were one beautiful family. And then I basically knew, so I knew I was going to the Air Force, but I didn't know what I wanted to do because I know it sounds really stupid, this, but being a pilot never actually grabbed me, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Um, and then I ended up studying A level philosophy and politics as well. I did obviously English and PE, but philosophy and politics really gripped me. And it was just after university, I kind of realised that I wanted to work in, I suppose, intelligence on the basis that there's something really interesting to me about intelligence because we know the phrase, we know there are people that do secret things, we know
Yeah.
top secret stuff happens, but what is it? What do they actually do? What does 24
Yeah.
hours in the life of someone who works intelligence look like? And most people don't know, and that's what attracted me. So I joined, and now I know what they do.
That's incredible. So, what, if you're allowed to go into any of the detail, what were the sort of roles that you fulfilled during that period of your career in the Air Force?
So like anything else, you start at the very bottom. So my first proper job was working basically as a kind of watch officer, and
Mm.
all the different types of reporting and intelligence and all this stuff would come in from across the world, and then someone has to kind of have a quick scan through it and try and find the relevant parts of it, and then send it off, scoot it off to
Mm.
different desks around the Air Force and around military intelligence, I suppose. and make sure that that really important stuff finds the right people. Equally, we used to have lads on the front line when I was first in that job. We had Iraq at the same time as Afghanistan. So
Wow.
equally, you'd have lads who were, say, fighting and they needed intelligence support. So they'd reach back to us, and the first person they'd meet is me, and they'd give me their question or their requirement, and say something like, "We had an helicopter that was flying on this mission last night. It was at this altitude, at this speed, at this place, at this time. Something has flown past the aircraft we believe it was shot at, and it looked like this. It had a tail of smoke. It had a something of this.
Wow.
And we need to figure out what it is." You could give that to me and to one of the guys, and then we could go through kind of like
And you're at that sort of next
kind of
level of
weapons
security.
knowledge.
You're allowed to look at what this might map
And
into.
then we'd try and identify what that might be. And if we can identify what it is, then we can start to decide where it's come from, who might use it, where they might fire it from. I can't go into too many details, but long story short is you could start to do a bit of a Sherlock Holmes game and say, right, we've looked at what's happened, and we believe that this has been used in this circumstance, which means that you can do X.
Yeah. That's fascinating, because there's also, I mean, and we will, I'll make this the last question about this, I promise, but it's like, have you seen some of the stuff that's going on where they are identifying these things that they believe to be drones, and they're transitioning from 1,000 foot down and going straight down into the water, and some of the sightings and the thermal patterns that these aircraft are giving off, and unidentified this and that. Does any of that romantically cast your mind back to, like, do you ever sit with the missus and be like, oh no, that's bullshit?
All the time.
Or do you kind of go, you know what, actually, yeah, we were seeing that 15 years ago.
I honestly, it excites me every time. I absolutely adore it. And I want to go back to work and figure it out. And
you ever just try and message a mate and you're like, dude, what's happening in this thing? He's like, mate, you've left. I can't tell you.
Let me know. Exactly. No, that's exactly what it is. You just can't talk business. That's the end of the day. And the cool thing is, I mean, that was my first ever job, okay? And I swear that was one of the most exciting jobs I've ever had. And it's like the baby step. It's the first thing you do in intelligence, and it's a great job. But what gets me kind of excited about it is that back in the day, you feel yourself like such a part of an important cycle, an important cog in a machine. Even though you contribute a little bit, you know that someone could phone you, because that desk was 12 hours on, 12 hours off, and you had we got 5 screens of death, because you had different things you could reach into for your information and talking to people and stuff. And it was such an exciting job. But what you realize is now everything I knew back then, everything I learned, all that super secret stuff, all that incredible knowledge is now absolutely pitiably worthless, because it's all got a sell-by date, because the future will arrive, and the predictions and the assessments and the ideas that we had back then, those days come and we find out. And then all of a sudden you're out the cycle, and now it sounds silly, but none of it's relevant anymore. Now I was an intelligence officer, and now I'm an old knowledge officer.
Yeah, I mean, you can still pull some tangible threads, perhaps. There's some things that perhaps don't change. I mean, the individuals and whatnot that are involved will change, of course, but some of the fundamental knowledge, and also maybe the mental models in how you would, assimilate, sort out, and disseminate that information is still be relevant. But sometimes I know what you're saying. I think of it with these people claim to be current affairs experts in, like, politics and stuff like that. I imagine they've got to empty their entire cup every day and refill it again with stuff that's only relevant today. And then tomorrow they've got to try and they've got 10 minutes in the morning to become an expert on shit they've just started reading about. And then they're going to sit down and say, I'm an expert. And you're like, you just fucking read it an hour ago.
I'll tell you, like, one of the best things I ever saw was, as far as I'm concerned, one of the best intelligence officers I've ever seen. An intelligent man, a man that could do more on a hangover than I could do on a sharp day. Like, we're talking a hell of a man. And I remember he said to me one time, it was about Libya. I said about this weekend, this weekend, we're gonna be good, because I was sat at my desk thinking, this Libya thing looks like it's coming to a climax. All these different countries are kicking off. And he said, nah, nothing this weekend. And I said, you sure? And he said, I'm telling you right now, nothing's going on this weekend. And I said, right. And as far as I was concerned, that man's the Bible to me. Came in on Monday morning, said, how's it going? I went, well, there's a war kicked off. And the leaders in hiding, and rebels are storming down the road with guns attached to vehicles. But otherwise, it's fine. And it was a surprise. But it taught me a lesson. It didn't teach me not to listen to him, because he remains one of the most intelligent men I've ever worked with.
Yeah.
What it teaches you is that the world is such a complex and interesting place that you can't sit still in it for 5 minutes, and you have to be ready for it to surprise you, and you have to have the humility to accept that, like, some things are just beyond understanding. And I love intelligence because it's all about you're trying to essentially, you're either trying to predict an enemy's actions in order to protect your men, or predict an enemy's actions to threaten that enemy. That's the basis of all intelligence. You try to look into the future as an educated position as you possibly can in order to do one thing or another. What it teaches you is you can have essentially all the information, you can have all the evidence, you can have all the experience in the world, but the world will still surprise you. And that's why it's exciting. Because ultimately someone's going to listen to your advice, because we're intelligence. We're not the bosses. We don't make the decisions. We sit next to the boss. It's the right hand to the seat of power.
Advisors, aren't you, I suppose?
Yeah, and we say this is what we think is going to happen, and he makes a plan based on it. And you have to sit there, and it's now this I have done for real, and it's as scary as it is exciting. But I've sat there and said, they've said to me and said, what do you reckon the bad guys are going to do? And I've given a very confident answer. This is what's going to happen. And then you then watch the actual men with the bang sticks make their plan based on your assessment. And you think, oh God, what have I just unleashed? But you sit by your word, and you always try and remember, like I did back then, that all you've done is given the best possible advice you can. And then you know that there are occasions
with the information I have
right.
at hand, this is the best indicator of the behavior I believe to take place.
Yeah, and you tell a level of certainty. You say, this is how certain I feel. And there have been occasions where I've said, I honestly couldn't see either way, but I will give you my assessment, but I'm telling you this is 50-50. But there have been times when I would say, I'll put my house on this. Really? And then, I remember one occasion in Afghanistan where there was a big operation that was organized where I basically said, this is how it is. And I remember saying it, thinking,
Captain Big Balls.
Here we go. Because again, the bit that gets you is I'm not running in the building. Yeah. I'm not running in the compound. Someone else has to risk their life now. But jobs don't get done until somebody decides to put themselves on the line a little bit. And I think I used to think that was a key part of what some intelligence officers missed, which was they weren't ready to actually commit themselves to what they truly believed in.
Mate, you make an amazing point there, and it's something on a very, very, very micro scale, but the analogy that I use sometimes in the emergency service is like, you can be the most developed, intellectual, competent individual, but if you are not confident and assertive in your knowledge and your beliefs, then you will give out that sense of fear to other people, because they won't have confidence in what you're about to say. I always say you could have a doctorate in pulmonary resuscitation, but if you turn up and you start fumbling about and you look indecisive, everyone's like, Ricky's going to fucking kill this guy. Whereas you could have just done a first aid day one, turn up, and if you're bang confident, you're like, I'm going to do this, I'm on the compressions, I'm on this, and people are like, oh, he knows his stuff. He is about to save the world.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's the same with that. You've got to have that confidence and assertiveness. I always say good operational incidents in the fire service for me are like 70% confidence. The longer you're there, you're trying to expand that window of knowledge, and you're trying to bring more factors into it. But the initial bit, you go, I only know a little bit. Now I can wait for ages to know a lot, but the risk is going to continue to climb the longer I wait. So and it's almost where do you feel that trigger point to be for you personally of I've got enough, I'm going to take action.
I think General Patton, this one quote really affected me many years ago, which was a 90% solution applied with vigor is often better than a 100% solution too late. Obviously, you can break that down, but my reading of that is simply like, again, you're never going to have the 100% picture. And there's a point at which you have to fill in that last 10% with experience, and you have to fill that last 10% in with educated guesses, because 90% will be there in front of you, but you cannot wait. You have to take action. And like he would say, whether it's taking the front foot in a conflict where you have to, mobilize around an enemy or whatever it is, or whether it's literally like you were saying, say you arrive at a scene and the scene is incredibly complex, you have to start somewhere.
Yeah.
And let's be honest, 90% of people can see opportunities to take action.
Yeah.
It's the 10% of them that say, but I'm not exactly sure which. Well, you're going to have to just pick. Yeah. And it's not a case of flipping a coin on it, I don't think. I think it's a case of experience, of literally just you as a much more experienced firefighter than I will have your instinct will say, I'm going to go to this person. That isn't a guess. Your instinct has seen so many more things this, that your instinct is probably based on 50 little bits of knowledge that are now coming together to fill in that last 10% gap.
I love that. Incredible, mate. It's what your mind does, isn't it? And people, we say things like instinct, or we say things like gut. Because we don't have the cognitive horsepower to realize that our mind is actually thrashing through a Rolodex of experiences. And I always think of it like blankets with holes in them, and it's layering all these blankets on top, and it's going there. Grid A3 is safe, and you're going,
Yeah.
oh, I'm thinking A3. I don't know why I'm thinking A3. And you
Yeah.
go to A3, and people go, oh, he's just good, or she's just really good. And you're like, no, my mind just thrashed through this Rolodex. I wasn't doing it. It was my subconscious. And then it went, my gut feeling says A3. And you go, oh, wow. And that's exactly what it is, though, isn't it? Yeah.
That's exactly what it is. And I literally love that. I think I've done different things before, and I think the fire service is definitely different to the military in the sense. No, that's not accurate. It's different to my personal experience in the military, because the fire service really, really, like, I've never seen experience pay off so quickly and so obviously in my entire life. Because no two scenes I've seen are the same, but they have echoes and similarities you can see in people's other experiences.
If you were to tilt your head and blur your eyes, they could all look similar, but they're very different. Yeah.
And then you can see solutions come in from all over the place. And you basically, I like the creativity I see in the fire service. I like when you say it comes to RTC and a vehicle needs moving or tilting or sliding, or this is what I'm saying is, move that vehicle. There are 60 or 70 different things that you could do to have an effect in order to get the result you want. And I really love seeing the creativity that I've seen through the people that I work with, in the sense of, like, they won't just find a way, they will find the way. They'll dive into this bag of tricks, and all of a sudden you're thinking, I've never seen anybody do that like that before. That's absolutely blown my mind.
Honestly, mate. And that is why I'm so romantic about the fire service, because it's such a mentally eclectic, neurodiverse bunch of people, more so now than ever. I mean, and you're a wonderful example. Like, people at different stages, at different chapters of their life, are coming in and they are throwing some of their experiences, some of their neurodiversity, some of their cognitive ideas into the bucket, and that cocktail just gets richer and richer and richer, and it becomes a fluid that you can apply to so many more diverse experiences. But what I always love, when you're talking then about military and fire service as well, we look upon the military and we give them tremendous amounts of respect, as well we bloody well should, and the thing that they do, and the fact that they keep us all safe and protecting the rights that we enjoy every single day. People in the fire service sometimes moan about training and complexity and stuff like that, but they also, on the same breath, say how disciplined the military are. And I'm like, but the military and the RAF and all of these services are still extremely disciplined, despite the fact you probably attend more operational things than they ever will. I think the number was very small. I was looking at it the other day, and I'm sure I'll misquote it, but it was something like 14% of the armed forces will ever deploy into a conflict area. And you're a great example of this, because, like, even if they do deploy, they may not actually be the person who's even in the contact. So you'll deploy, but you'll be part of the information. You'll be part of the the admin, the bloody cooking, the whatever,
the massive logistical
support
chain
engine that drives the whole beast over there. And it's something very small, like 3% of them will ever be involved in a contact.
This is exactly it. And I think that I remember I had a brief. Basically, when I was in the Air Force, I then got attached for a couple of years to the parachute regiments, to 16th Air Assault Brigade. I got to work with the Army for a little while, and that was very interesting for me, because culturally, the Army is very different to the Air Force, and more importantly, the paras are probably different to a lot of the Army. But one thing they used to do, the officers would do a brief, a weekly or fortnightly, whatever it was, on a given subject of interest, and it was part of your own personal development, but it was also what they saw as fun. And I found that strange and yet wonderful. And one guy gave us a brief on what he described as the reality of the Second World War in terms of facing the enemy. And he did the exact same thing. And he says, we think of all these guys back in those days, your granddads and stuff, and think, like, what fucking brave men they were marching to fight the enemy. But he explained the massive logistical chain that was at the back end of that war, and how ultimately only a handful of Second World War men ever actually got to a trench to the front line. That isn't to say there weren't tens of thousands of them and brave men, but as an overall percentage, it's something that is, you don't think of it that way. We aren't taught to think of it that way. And equally, when we look at the modern soldier, exactly like you're saying, we sustained about, I think it was 9,500 men in southern Afghanistan for the better part of a decade, of which there are a handful that have got truly face-to-face experiences of the enemy. And then many of us, myself included, were simply part of keeping those lads as effective as they possibly could be.
Mm-hmm.
Because the modern soldier, like as you say, their kit and equipment requirements are massive. Their logistical requirements are massive. Their training requirements are massive. Their like support structure, even whilst they're on tour, medically, for example, is massive. And then intelligence-wise, they don't make an operation that doesn't have, for example,
No, that's
intelligence
it. There's
support. It
no one
doesn't have
sighting your
air
weapon. You
cover.
can fire it in
No,
whatever direction you like, and you're not going to be effective. You have to have someone sighting it, and you have to have a spotter
and
telling you where to point it.
to be honest, it was my privilege to be part of a team that supported those lads because I'm not going to lie, I absolutely adored it. Especially the more punchy the operation was, and I got to stand next to some pretty punchy people.
Yeah.
That in itself, I know it sounds silly, we can't all be heroes, and I was not one of those guys. And I did my own little bit, but simply for me, the electricity to stand next to, I remember I stood next to a colonel of I would say a special team.
Yeah, yeah.
It's probably the best way of putting it. And I remember when I was talking to him, I suppose I didn't really, I was very not immature, but my knowledge was immature. And I respected him, but I didn't really quite know who he was. And I remember I realized who he was when I went into a room, because he'd specifically asked me to give a brief on a specific subject that I was fairly well knowledgeable on, to help him with this operation. So I went in the room early and I set all my stuff up, and then everyone filled in the room, and then he walked in. And when he walked in, everyone shut the fuck up, and they looked at him, and there was reverence. And then he gave an opening remark, and he turned around to me and said, in quite a nice voice, "Okay, Richard, would you mind speaking the men through, blah blah blah." And then he said, "Some of you won't know Richard. He's my intelligence officer on this area." And he said, "My intelligence officer," and everyone paid attention to me like they paid attention to him. His skills were so elite that simply saying "this is my guy" was enough that everyone in that room gave me a level of attention and understanding.
Yeah.
Exactly. Now that is a frontline man. That's hero boots right there.
But let's go there for a second, because there's one layer of something there that you're articulating, but is not specifically what we're talking about there. But I think it's an important thing to talk about, because, and maybe this is a differentiation between military, army, RAF as well, because one of my exes, her dad was a wing commander, and he was he's a judge now, after since he's retired. Very articulate, very eloquent man. And the question I want to ask in relation to that is, when you have the ability to speak to a crowd, when you have the ability, and we could even use this analogy with CrossFit and stuff like that, when you lead in a session, when you get in front of people, your ability to stand and deliver, your ability to bring that reverence and that presence into a room, and the ability to articulate yourself. The limits of my language are the limits of my world. And if you can't communicate to these people very well, and that's one thing that I think in today's society, and I see it in the military service and stuff like that, and it's kind of, in all honesty, big push with the podcast, is I want people to be able to talk. I want them to be able to expand their language. I want them to be able to, communicate all the different things that they've been through. And that individual there, in the way that you gave an example of them, despite the fact they've got colossal amounts of operational experience and operational weight and collateral they bring to the situation, it's their ability to address people and deliver people, and they don't let their standards slip. I let myself down sometimes because I swear too much, and I'm frustrated that I do. I know it does also give me an authenticity and a connection to the people that listen to the podcast, but I'm also like, don't do that all the time, mate. You're letting yourself down a little bit. So could you just go there for a second, when you've worked with people at that level, and how you see that in terms of the leaders that are developing today? Is it something where we should all learn to articulate ourselves and deliver ourselves a bit better? Because you've got to be worth listening to as well.
The first thing for me is that I find has been a huge benefit to my life is that when I went to officer training, I spent 10 months becoming a leader, basically. Okay. 10 months, so that at the end of that period of time, I could stand in a group of anywhere between, say, 5 and 50 young RAF lads, and I could deliver orders, I could give command briefings, I could administrate their daily lives, and I could hopefully deliver whatever arm of the military I was in. In that 10 months, we had to do, for example, like long courses on defense writing, where they would make us write emails, make us write reports, make us write things. Because if you can't write an email that clearly addresses the person, the task that you want, signs off, then you're basically, I know it sounds stupid, but if you can't write an email, you're useless. Yeah. And if you can't write a report, you're useless. And then when I went to, after following that, you spend 6 months then in intelligence training, where I remember our classrooms had cameras in them. And every time we had to stand up multiple times a day and deliver briefs on any subject. Like, so usually it was a piece of military piece, like a piece of artillery or a weapon system. And the point is, you'd brief for 5 minutes, excuse me. And that brief then was videoed. And sometimes they'd come up into the room and be like, Rich, could breathe in 1 second. And you didn't think it was that big a deal. And they'd take you into a room and they'd replay the camera. And they'd say, do me a favor and just count how many times you say, count how many times you say, so, count how many times you say, yes, count how many times you put your hands in front of your mouth, count how many times you do this. And honestly, it was painful at times to have to go into review your own speech patterns, your own language, your own way you go through. But ultimately, the biggest barrier between getting a group to solve the problem when you're the boss and the problem being solved is your ability to let them know what it is you need and how you need it doing. Mate. In your head, you can be the world's best. That colonel may have been the world's best operator, but if he needs to be the world's best leader, he needs to then be able to express his desires to his team in a concise and effective manner. So you don't have to be born into books. You don't have to be born into leadership. These are skills the military believe they can teach you because that's why the course is laid out that way. And the fire service is saying they can teach you these skills. But at the same time, you have to start to take the first step, and you have to be forward looking, and you have to start speaking because, like I said, you don't learn from the words you didn't say. And for us, we had to review those briefs because that's what mattered. Practicing again and again and again and again. Yeah. And I think that if you want to make leaders, we have to start, obviously, put them in leadership positions, challenging them to speak, challenging them to write, challenging them to express themselves, but then also making sure you're highly critical of them.
That is the bit, mate. You've got to have the emotional maturity to take that feedback, because I literally wrote down 360 feedback on my paper when you were talking then, because this is something that, as much as you're kind about the fire service there, and I'll just use it in my whole emergency services, although most of my experience will be within the fire service, is that we're lacking a little bit of that emotional maturity where we are able to take the feedback like you took there. Because if you were to give that feedback to some individuals, they would go, look, do I do the brief or not? This is a personal attack here, Rich. You know, why are you saying just because I don't say it the same way that you say it then? And I'm like, no, but you've got to be able to take that feedback, because this is from the end user. This is from the customer. And if they say that it sounded really exciting, like a podcast sometimes, they're like, oh, that was really exciting and really interesting, Pete, but I don't know what the takeaway was. Do you know what I mean? I don't know what I'm supposed to take away from that.
So
there was no...
Let me just give you one story about this. And this is a really important story for my entire life. I was a junior officer and I was sent to 16 Brigade. 16 Brigade are a punchy unit, and they're known to be taking souls. The last two guys before me got sacked and sent back to the Air Force. And I was there on the basis that if I got sacked, then the Air Force would be in tatters, and that would be our reputation ruined forever. Yeah. So it was in a difficult position. I'd been with them a couple of months, and then we went on our first major exercise, and we were up north in Scotland, and I delivered an intelligence brief. And the brigadier to a junior officer, a captain, in front of colonels, in front of, majors, the lot. I finished the brief. He thought about it for about 5 seconds and then said, "That was absolutely terrible. I genuinely don't know what it is you're trying to tell me here. I don't know what the takeaways are. That entire brief got lost." Okay. And he just said to me straight out, "You're going to go away, fucking go through that whole thing. And I want in 6 hours time, whatever it is, it should have been the first time, because that was shit." And it was in front of everybody. Yeah. And I'm not going to lie, I was a young man, but I was halfway between taking a swing at him and crying.
Yeah.
And I genuinely mean, my emotions were so deeply hurt. I was both incredibly embarrassed and I was incredibly angry. Yeah. And I felt it was just undeserved. Anyway, I went back in the intelligence cell, which is a cell. It's obviously separate. You can't. And I think I kicked a chair over and I started ranting.
Fucking and another captain. Who does he think he is?
Exactly what I said. He's a prick. I think he is. And a captain came in, a wily old guy who'd been around a lot longer than me and done a lot more than me and knew a lot more than me. And he said, "Richard," and also I didn't particularly like him. He came in and said, "Richard, let me just give you a piece of advice." He said, "You will do better when you realise that in that room, nobody cares about your feelings." And he said, "Let me be sure you know what that means." He said, "I think you're a decent bloke. The boss thinks you're a decent bloke. Other people think you're a decent bloke. But in that room over there, we're about operations. We're about jobs. We're about getting things done." When he gave you that feedback, you're upset because you think he told you were shit. You're upset because he thinks he told you weren't good enough, and you think that he's a knobhead now, and you're going to kick the chair and you're going to tell him to fuck off because he's rubbish. Yeah. In actual fact, if you just sit for a second and accept that we think you're an all right bloke, we like you as a person, we get along, put all that to one side because none of it matters right now, because now we're talking operations. All he's told you is a simple and simple and short truth. It wasn't good enough. And he's told you exactly why. And he's told you that he'd like you to give the opportunity to repeat it. And he's told you when. So now your only task is to take on board that feedback, restructure your brief, look at what you're trying and failing to say, and do a better job. And stop getting hurt. Because if you remember that nobody cares about your feelings for 5 minutes and you just take this direction, you'll be better for it.
Yeah.
And let's be honest, that didn't sink in immediately. I didn't immediately go, oh, what a wonderful piece of advice you just did out to me.
I was kicking the chairs over still.
I kicked and screamed for hours, but I redid the brief and I went back in and I delivered it. And the boss gave me feedback that was something like, that was marginally better. Good job. And then he carried on. But over the course of 2 years, I'd like to think that I did take that advice on board. And I remembered that when the feed, and I would say for my life, I've tried to take that on board. Even now when I have a gym and people leave my gym, sometimes people have left and said, this was rubbish or that was rubbish, or they have a complaint or whatever it is. It's rare, but it does happen from time to time.
Yeah.
I try and remember what Jocko Willink says. You know, Jocko Willink is really about like taking those truths on board. And I just try and take ultimate responsibility for it and remember it's not a character assassination. It's not even about me. It's about the work. It's about the delivery of the products. And that's what I'm being measured on in this environment. And if that needs to be changed and upgraded and worked on, then that's my job to do that. And it's not my job to sulk about it. I value myself as a person. I am a good person. I work hard. I'm kind. I'm compassionate. I am diligent. But sometimes I will get things wrong. And sometimes I'll get things more wrong than others. And when somebody tells me that, I won't allow it to bring me down as a person, as Richard, but I will allow it to change my actions as a professional. And that is my kind of
crucial, mate, being able to separate yourself in that respect. And also you make a great point there, both from the leadership, so the delivering through others, i.e. leadership, versus the individual contributor who is just focused on their ability to do it. But when you say about the gym there as well, if you were just getting something right, but you don't know why you're getting it right, you're just very luckily, blindly wandering through the dark and you just haven't fallen off the plank yet. It's a bit of blind luck. And people go, well, he's just 1 in a million, isn't he, Ricky? He's just, he's just really good at what he does. Yeah, but he doesn't know what it is he's doing. He's just doing it. And that means it's not repeatable. He couldn't coach you how to do it. He couldn't teach you how to do it. He couldn't lead another team how to do it. He can do it himself, but he doesn't really know what it is he's doing. So if he said, oh, I'm going to advise so-and-so on how to set up a gym in Scotland, he probably won't be able to do it because he's just doing it his way with no real feedback. So that's why that, if I'm hearing you correctly, that's why that is so important as well.
You have to be able to just do that self-assessment coldly and calmly. You know, I'm lucky I'm surrounding myself. I'm surrounding myself. I'm not like, you know, one of the Musketeers, but I mean, I've had an opportunity to meet a lot of cool people, and a lot of cool people in my life at the moment, and from all sorts of different things. And the one thing that I do notice between the successful ones is their ability to respond and adapt to criticism.
Yeah.
They have a thick skin. I don't think it's a thick skin when you get used to taking it though, because when you realize again it's not about you as a person, then you don't need a thick skin. All you need to do is accept that you can be better at pretty much everything. And when you do, and you become hard over on that, people get really good at stuff. And again, as I say, like, you know, I can count games athletes as friends, self-made millionaires as friends. I can count operators in the military as friends, now firefighters, and there are some really elite people in there. And I think that's probably the heart of all of them, is that they just ultimately, humbly want to get quite a lot better at everything.
And that's
I
what I said.
Joining the fire service is interesting because it's just another series of yeah. I mean, that's ultimately it. Like I do quite enjoy learning on the job in the fire service. I'm not really afraid to learn. I'm not really afraid to fail. And I think that's really important part of being a firefighter. Is what I've learned is that this job, especially, like there is good protection from failure, I suppose, to a degree.
Yeah, there is.
But there also isn't. Like some things just have a way they have to be done, and you kind of either do them correctly or you don't, and that's that, and you have to practice till you get it right. And you have a limit of knowledge. I mean, some stuff is just such a discrete knowledge. For example, when it's your knots and lines, there's discrete knowledge. You either know how to do X and Y or you don't. So when you get found out that you don't, you need to go and simply learn that discrete task and start to fill the gaps. And when it comes to more stuff like the trauma side of it, I enjoy because it's a more fluid environment, and
Yes.
you have knowledge that you can apply to different situations,
There's so
and
much
that's one
rapport built
where
on it
I
as well.
suppose
You
it's
can
not
fold in
as
behavioral aspects because
yeah,
of the way you work with people.
and you can get better at it, but you can get better at it without you have to try and do it without necessarily without having the results and the feedback of how great well it went, if you know what I mean. So for example, say you put a timer on for an RTC and you've got a simple RTC, and we're going to try and take this door off, and then we're going to try and do this, then we're going to try and do that and move the vehicle. You might say that job yesterday took us 40 minutes, and let's be honest, that's far too long. We need to be moving quicker than that. The door should have been off quicker, this should have happened, blah blah blah. That's quite simple feedback. With trauma, say you arrive to a casualty, the casualty is changing or deteriorating or responding. You don't necessarily know whether you did the best thing for it other than your
Yeah.
feeling and feedback from the crew. And that's one where, you'll ever be learning and improving, and you kind of won't know how good you've got till you've got there, I suppose. We have a girl
Yeah.
on our watch who's particularly good at it. And as I say, it's not one thing that she does, and it's not that she just knows this bit of extra knowledge. Her application over the time has become so refined that
Yeah.
we all trust her to be the first person to take control of that because we know that her outcomes are going to be so good.
Mm. And
I love
also,
that.
certainly with something like trauma, I feel there's a big aspect to be done about the way in which you can seamlessly transition between different things, i.e., taking somebody's vitals, moving into this, doing observations, and still engaging them in conversation. Some people struggle with those bits because they come from a fixed operational mindset of first I'm going to do A, then I'm going to do B, then I'm going to do C, and it's like that. There's like a task completion. Whereas in so many things in the fire service, the really effective teams is that simultaneous activity, both personally and also as a team as well. And then that's how, that's probably an articulation for efficiency in itself. That's how the whole thing starts to become more fluid and less detached and jarring in a procedural sense.
I think I find that quite tricky. I obviously have Asperger's. So for me, I like patterns and procedures, and I like going through
That's why you would have
systems.
loved intelligence.
Yeah, well, yeah. But at the same sense, though, Asperger's isn't a cul-de-sac. It isn't a one-way thing. It's a thing that you can grow and you can improve yourself. And I would like to think over the years, I've definitely changed my character in response to knowing myself a little bit better.
Mm.
And like you say, it's as simple as, every time you move through a step, you can ask yourself a question. Am I thinking about the person that's in front of me? So rather than thinking about the leg or the arm or the heart, whatever it is, you've got to remind yourself to put your head up and look and ask and smile. You know what I mean? Now, so it's being so procedure based, you can still break out of it. And I know that a lot of people have asked me. I was asked the other day at work. They said, "Do you think Asperger's affects you at work?" And I said, the hardest bit about having Asperger's, I found in the fire service or anything else, is actually the social side of it. Because I think when it comes to learning things and executing tasks, it's quite straightforward. It's not that big a deal. But the hardest thing is that the fire service is the watch is a small enclosed family, and a lot of the communication stops being explicit like it would be. For example, if I was in a large, say I was in the air warfare centre, there's 40 or 50 people I'm going to work with. We work on quite a formal basis with meetings and chats that I can interpret openly. With a watch, when you've got 4 other people and you spent 48 hours that week together, and they spent 10 years doing it, a lot of their conversation now becomes almost non-verbal. They just nod and smile and laugh and have in jokes and bits and pieces. And for a person with Asperger's, that's an absolute nightmare. It's like trying to read a different language.
Mate,
So that's
there's
the
a
hardest bit for
massive
me.
irony, and I agree with you in that. And I actually struggle with. I'm not going to pretend to struggle to the extent that you do, probably just in a different way. But I've been tested for several things. But like people think, oh, you must love it on Watch, Pete, and you must be relaxed. No, think because they say the podcast and then they say that, and I'm like, no, well, think about what I do on the podcast. At the minute, I'm having a very personal, one-to-one, deep conversation with Ricky. If you try to do that every day with people, for them, it's very exhausting. It's a very personal thing, and it takes time as well. So I struggle with mediocre conversations, and that sounds so horrible, but like I struggle with the day-to-day, puddle depth, shallow banter, this, that, and the other, because I turn to someone and want to ask them a purposeful a question or a meaningful question, and it's deep, and they're like, "Oh, fucking help it, I ain't got time," and I'm like, "Oh, okay."
Honestly,
And then that's why I struggle. I struggle in bars. I always say I'm social, but I'm not sociable, and I always get those two mixed up. But what I mean is, you put me in front of a group, probably the same as you. Chuck me in front of a CrossFit group, chuck me in front of anything of our own gyms myself, and I can stand in front of a crowd. I'm happy to do it. I'll meet anybody, yeah? But if you said, "Oh, do you want to come to the thing at the pub, or do you want to come to the party?" I would probably actively try and exclude myself from the thing, or I would struggle in that situation because it's just a different dynamic.
I literally couldn't relate to you anymore then. I wanted to burst. I went on a detachment to a station the other day for the first time,
Yeah.
and I had a great day. And I only realized at the very end that they'd had quite an exhausting day because I'd spent the whole day talking about like politics or
Yeah.
firefighting knowledge or skills or jobs or whatever. And
Yeah.
the boss smiled at me as he left, but he went, Jesus, don't let him collar you. He won't show up, this guy. And it
Yeah.
was funny
I get
because
the same,
I'd
mate.
spent the day having really, to me, exciting and interesting conversations with these new people I'd never met who were absolutely wonderful. And I literally thought they were just the best. And yeah, I felt so embarrassed at the end that I hadn't realized that I'd literally exhausted them all with
Yeah.
with with that. I don't. I'm not trying to go anywhere with this. I'm just trying to say how hard I
No, I
relate to what you
agree with
just
you,
said.
mate.
And I
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
so embarrassed in the car driving home,
No.
wishing like I'd have just been a bit cooler and a bit quieter. Because I know it sounds like stupid. I honestly just want to make friends, and I just
I'm
felt
just
super
fascinated with
embarrassed.
people and human behavior. I always call it the second layer because most people just ask the first layer of questions. Morning, Ricky, you all right, mate? Do you know what I mean? It'll be like, yeah, have a good weekend. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. But then I'll go, oh, so what is it your missus does? Or, or what is it you found enjoyable about the thing you did on Saturday? Or, oh, have you, what sort of progress or plan are you making with your whatever CrossFit program at the moment? And
Yeah,
they'll go, oh, or you ask them why they enjoy a thing and they'll go, I don't know, Pete. No one's really asked me. That's a bit deep, isn't it? And I'm like, oh,
yeah,
sorry. And also, I end up being so open about my stuff. Like, I'll be like, oh yeah, me and my wife's had a miscarriage or this, and then they're like, I don't think I've just met you, mate. I don't know if I want to go there. It's like it's a
yeah,
bit much.
yeah, yeah,
And I'm like, oh,
yeah.
sorry, yeah, okay, sorry.
Yeah,
I didn't realize we were just doing polite
yeah,
nothingness.
yeah. I literally, I do you ever? I don't. Maybe it's relatable for you. If you ever find yourself, if you're having a conversation, say a group of people you meet, and you start talking, it's one of my rudest traits, and I'm trying to stop it. But say, for example, we're having a conversation, and for a second, the spark looks like it might be interesting, so I'll like kind of sit and pay attention, like, oh yeah, yeah, I like that, and then it'll go back to like the weather or
Yeah.
football, and I literally just end up just sitting back, and then my eyes are kind of glazed over, and then I'm probably on my phone, and then before I knew it, everyone's left the table, and someone goes, "Richie, you coming?" And I go, "Oh shit, yeah, yeah." And sometimes they have to
I
call me,
try to
and I'm
hang in
like,
there.
and
I try to hang in
I'm
there.
not
It's
being
so hard.
rude.
Yeah.
I think it's one of my like worst qualities, especially like how Aspergers does present itself in the sense of I can't I find it hard to then understand my conversation in the group. I don't know how this conversation is going. I'm confused why we're all talking about like the weather or something. Really, I'm like, why are we all talking about this for
One
such a
thing
long
that's
time?
really helped me was a coach gave me some advice a long time ago that said, meet them where they are. And that can be used both in a teaching environment, but also in a conversational environment. If that person has chosen to retract back to
Yeah,
where they are in this conversation, maybe it went a bit deep, or maybe it went into something they didn't want. I always think of it like a cat that you're trying to nurture out from under the sofa, and then if suddenly something's happened, or you've asked them the wrong thing, or you've moved in a certain way, and the cat's retracted back under the sofa. So you've got to go back again and start small and
yeah,
go, oh yeah, I'm also really interested in the weather, and little
yeah,
behaviors, mirroring, paraphrasing, open questions. Do you know what I mean? And then slowly
yeah,
you bring the layers of defensiveness off the conversation again. You bring it back out into the open, and people can open up again. But
yeah,
all of a sudden you've been sat there for 4 hours in the morning and you've not got any drill done yet, and everyone's.
yeah.
This is a really
I,
fascinating conversation,
I
people. We've got
super
some shit to
struggle.
do.
Yeah, I super struggle. I super struggle, but but I do enjoy it. As I say, I do enjoy it. The only risk you take there is being a little bit embarrassed sometimes, and it kind of is what it is.
That's
But no,
what I do. I try
I
and do
do.
it publicly on the
I've enjoyed.
podcast all the time, just to embarrass myself
There's a
publicly.
lot. There's a lot I enjoy. In the gym, I find obviously that's a place I can love it most because in the gym I can be as passionate down this rabbit hole as I possibly want because that's
Mm.
why people are there. So my gym is my favorite place to be because I've got a captive audience.
Let's change gears and go there. I was looking at I always do a little bit of philosophy and a little bit of stoicism, but I was looking at some Socrates again this morning, and it kind of jumped
Hmm.
out at me ahead of our conversation. One of Socrates' quotes was, "No man has the right to be an amateur in the matter of physical training. It's a shame for a
Yes.
man to grow old without seeing the beauty and strength of which his body is capable. And it made me think a lot about you. So I noted it down
But I
before
honestly
our
think that's
conversation.
hilarious. That quote was behind my friend in his training this morning, and
Yeah.
we take that quite personally in my family. My dad is 70, and within about the next 15 minutes, I'm going to look out the window to the left where he has like a patio area that's near my house. And he's going to come out, and at 70, he's going to do some burpees. He's going to do some squats. He's going to do some kettlebell swings. He's going to do some box jumps. He's probably going to do a little bit of some skipping, some double unders, get his heart rate up. He may do some heavy carries. There's a flight of stairs. He likes to do some heavy carries up these stairs nearby. And he's 70,
Wow.
and he doesn't particularly enjoy it as much as he used to. But my dad trains every morning, and it's raining outside, and he'll do it anyway. And he just does that most days of the week. We're not like cold bath kind of people, like ice plunge kind of
Yeah.
discomfort people. But in the master of physical training, we take it very seriously. Whilst he's doing that, my mum will be in the living room of the house, and she had a knee replacement about 4 or 5 years ago, and she'll be doing her physiotherapy exercises to strengthen her quads and her hamstrings and glutes and support and stabilize her knee. And then after that, she'll do a lot of core exercises that she does every single day at the same time as teacher's training. And then she goes downstairs and she's got the bike for about half an hour. At 70 years old, my mum and dad probably skied, I think this year, maybe 60 or 70 days skiing this year. Last year, probably nearer 100. And
Man.
and that's what they're about. Like they and I don't mean skiing as in like pottering about. I mean, my mum's mum likes to quite aggressively ski. She's very competitive. And at 70, that's what they're about. Physical training isn't, as such in our house, a thing that you think about doing. It's a thing that you just do.
How you choose to do it is up to you, but we're all doing it.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. And it's just the way, that's just the way that is. My dad, I started jujitsu about 6 months ago. So my dad's keen on coming to do the jujitsu fundamentals with me.
Yeah.
And the problem that we're going to have is that he can move in ways that 70-year-olds can't really move. He's particularly strong. I mean, he choked me out about 3 years ago. We had a roll on the floor and he choked me out, which made me laugh. He did judo as a kid, and he knows a couple of. He was, I think, the British champion at judo, only as a white belt though.
Yeah.
But and he knows a couple of chokes and stuff. And yeah, he tapped me at like 66, 67 or something. So he wants to come and do some jujitsu. As I say, like physical training is a passion for the whole family.
So when did this
So
first start for you? Because I imagine they encouraged you to engage in sports or physical disciplines as a kid. Like, talk to me
yeah.
about where did Rich's fundamentals, where did the framework come from?
So I suppose it would have been watching at a very young age. My mum was like quite a high level professional dancer. My dad played rugby for British Police, and then he played football for British Police. And then he stopped playing football for British Police and started playing rugby league and rugby union concurrently for the police, back when the police was big.
Yeah.
He played also then in a club in Manchester that went all the way down to Wembley, I believe. And he's actually on the wall of his club. When the lottery bought them a new clubhouse, they put my dad up as on like the Hall of Fame as their first player.
Oh, wow.
And then my sister played for England netball, and then she played a sport called korfball, which is a fun American sport, which is boys and girls mixed together. But she was the GB captain at that.
I
So
remember when they
watching
brought
the
in
family
high
play
five
sport,
because that was mixed. Because
yeah,
I played netball in primary school for a bit because my primary school didn't do basketball, obviously amongst other sports. But then they brought in high five when I was in like year 4 or something, so boys and girls could both do it, and it was a little bit
it's kind of like
more,
that.
a little bit faster.
But Becca did that when she was like 21-ish. So she was
Yeah.
like whatever it was, she was like the mixed captain, which I find hilarious that the girl, everyone would automatically think there'd be some bloke in charge, but Becca was steaming ahead on that one.
Love it.
So I basically started watching, and then I ended up, I think I danced from being probably 4 years old because mum had dancing schools, being a dancer. But then I think my first proper sporting experience was enjoying football. And I remember I got picked to play for Oldham Athletic School of Excellence, like a club football team.
Nice.
But I didn't really like football. I know it sounds stupid. I just didn't really enjoy it, but I was quite good at it.
No, mate, I've had that where you're good at a sport but you don't enjoy it, and I've
No,
gravitated away from stuff, but people have encouraged you to do it just because you're good at it.
I dropped that because I didn't like being cold on a Saturday morning. It sounds so stupid, but I was always just like, this is rubbish, this. And then I took up some other sports. I remember I figure skated for about 5 years. I went to quite an elite level at that. And then I played, when I got to like teenager, like later years, 18 or so, I played for Manchester Giants basketball club, which was like a really big deal at the time. And then, yeah, I mean, in the meantime, though, I was at Oldham Sixth Form College, which has an unbelievable history for sport. And I remember we went to the national finals for volleyball. I remember we I played table tennis in my lunch times at school and ended up coming third at the national schools and colleges for that. That's quite funny. And then trampolining was good. Yeah, we came third. I mean, there were two trampoliners at college, and I remember you need three to make a team. So they were like, "Rich, get on that trampoline," and they taught me how to trampoline. I could do somersaults and tucks and stuff. So
Yeah,
I
just do a pike
ended up.
drop and that'll do you. You'll be fine.
So I think we became second or third in the country at that. That was quite funny. The lad that was on our team went on to win the Commonwealth Games gold medal, and he went on to be Cirque du Soleil. And then the
No
lad that was second,
way.
Ross. Yeah, the lad that was
Oh,
second team,
wow.
Ross, went to China and is a gymnastics coach for the Chinese national team.
Fucking hell, isn't that
So that's pretty
amazing?
cool. And then I went to university, started playing rugby. Played rugby then in university, and I played in the military. And I've obviously snowboarded and skied since I was probably about 6 years old. So I did a bit of that as well. I did everything. I was a flying trapeze artist in America for 2 years. That was quite funny. I taught children how to fly a trapeze.
How did
I
that
did that because
manifest? Was that during the RAF or?
no, it was when I finished university. I went to America to work on summer camp, and I was working at summer camp before it opened. You're cutting grass and painting buildings and stuff. I think I got drunk in a bar and did a somersault or something because I did trampolining before that.
Yeah.
So I think I got drunk and did a somersault. This bloke was like, "I run like a trapeze program where we go around, these kids camps and we
Yeah.
set the rig up and we teach children how to fly trapeze. And you obviously look like you're a bit acrobatic. Would you be interested in having a try?" And I remember I learned how to. I spent a few weeks learning, and then we spent summers teaching these children how to fly trapeze and doing shows. I remember one of the rules he said one night is that you got to knock on my door in the middle of the night. And it was we'd just finished setting up the rig and it was safe to fly. And he knocked on my door and said, "Come with me." And there was about, 5 guys and 5 girls. And it was in summer in America. It was really warm. And he said, "You always christen a trapeze with a naked fly." And everyone just took the clothes off. And then we flew trapeze naked in the middle of the night. And that was one of my
Oh,
weirdest
mate, that
experiences.
must have been wicked.
Yeah,
What an
that was
awesome, like,
cool.
eclectic development and stuff. All that travel as well.
Yeah, and then so I found CrossFit. And when I found CrossFit, that was it then I've been doing it probably my first workout for about 12 years ago.
Hmm.
And I've been competing for about competed for 9 years. Competed internationally, all the big ones.
How old would you
The
have been
biggest one
then?
I
26, 25, 26? How old were you
about
when?
20, yeah, something like that. About that. I know that I definitely started. I was doing proper CrossFit workouts over 10 years ago because they're now popping up on Facebook. Do you know my first check-ins on Facebook to a gym or doing a workout?
Yeah, yeah.
So about 10 years ago, I was like in boxes, knocking out benchmarks and doing my first competitions.
Hmm.
So I would assume that it was at least a couple of years before I started doing
What
doing the
appealed to
big
you
doing
about it?
stuff. But the reason I first went is honestly because I wasn't that fit. When I got into the military, I wanted to just be fitter and stronger. And I was only a little guy. I was only probably like 70 something kilos. And I just wanted to be fitter and stronger. And I remember watching a competition where my friend invited me to watch this comp. I didn't realize it was CrossFit. He said, "Come look at this fitness thing." And the guys were incredibly well conditioned and incredibly strong. And then
Yeah.
they finished the competition and they all had like a barbecue. They all had a beer and a burger and had a laugh. And it reminded me of the post rugby matches.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I thought I'd love a bit of this. And that's where it started me. And it's taken me around the world, to be honest. It's literally taken me around the world a couple of times. For
Because people see
example,
this, but they think it's like the one in a million opportunity. And I appreciate it is becoming harder as the sport continues to explode. But you were really caught it in its infancy as well, I suppose, when these big competitions started getting themselves. So obviously, I was speaking to Matt Chan a couple of weeks ago, and he was saying how back then things were still very much in their infancy. Not that he wouldn't be able to do the same now at the same age, I don't know, but he was like, it was a very different sport back then. There was less opportunities, but if you really went hard at it, there was almost more opportunities for you because there was less people doing it.
yeah. So I remember Matt Chan. I suppose one time I remember coming back from Afghanistan. I can't remember what year it was. I came back from Afghanistan and I immediately flew out to California and I went to the CrossFit ranch where the games was held early doors and I did my level 1 with the head of CrossFit training. And then I went to the games because I know I had a friend who had a friend in the games. So I went to watch the games and I watched Matt Chan it must have been about 2014. So
Really?
Matt Chan, Chris Spieler
Yeah,
thrown
yeah,
in,
yeah.
like Dan Bailey. I watched all those guys and managed to do some workouts and stuff. But I mean, for me, most recently, the biggest event most recently is obviously Wodapalooza in Miami.
Mm.
So I flew out to Miami in the January for about 5 weeks with Amy Kringle, who's the UK number 1 for 2 years running now. She's one of our big hopefuls for the games. and me and her
These are
flew
pretty good
out.
friends. What's the logistics? Obviously, we're not going to say where she lives or anything, but you guys able to you train every month or so together, maybe a little bit more?
So no, we used to train. We used to train a lot, basically, because we had the same coach, and we did used to train quite a lot together. But recently, she's moved down to the kind of the south west of the country, and she's training down there. So I haven't seen her for a little while. CrossFit, it sounds silly, but there are so many friends in it that you just have to like see them and then not see them and see them and not
Oh
see them.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I saw like I mean, look, what I like to do is I like to drop in with different people. I'm anchored to Gritstone a lot of the time because that's my home place, that's my gym.
Yeah.
But I do try and get about. So I saw Reggie just before quarterfinals. I trained with Emily at my gym the other day. I was down at BFG not so long ago. Popped in to see Zach. I just try and either they get about or I get about. But people either come to me or I go to them. But generally, I'm lucky if I train with someone. Probably every 2-3 weeks, I would say.
Mm.
Dan Ty comes across from time to time. I was over at Form the other day, and he wanted to drop in and cheer us on. And then he got caught looking after one of his properties. But we all try and catch each other up. But essentially, when you're working in CrossFit, you've always got so much on. Like, for example, for
Oh
me,
God, yeah.
when I was working in CrossFit, you get half your wages from some wages from the gym. Then you get half your wages from online PT. Then you get half your wages from your sponsors. Then you get this, and this. Then you've got maybe 8 competitions a year, of which 4 of them are international. So you've got a flight. And say, for example, it's Miami, and you've got at least 2 weeks out there beforehand to acclimatize and get ready. When I took Shah for the games, we had, again, I think it was 2 weeks before the games, we were out there acclimatizing. Then you've got, say, for example, I spoke to Virus today about an activation in London. So we're going down to London for this. And then you've got someone else who needs like I don't know, say I've got a seminar with the military. I'm in Aldershot in May for that. So you kind of like, you want to see your friends to train with them. But the more kind of senior you get, the more you realize that you just have to do it on your own when you're ready to do it.
Yeah.
Like you can't.
100%.
And people ask me about this, I get loads of questions on firefighters. When do you fit your training in? Yeah, I don't have a training routine. And I don't think when you're working shifts, as much as I was a more professional athlete, when you're working busy like that, you can't say it every day at 10 o'clock I'm going to train and every day at 2 p.m. I'm going to train again. You have to be adaptable and mobile and just know what you need to do and get it done whenever you can do it.
Yeah, you
I
know
think
what
there are
good looks like, and then you kind of couple it together with the time, resources, and locations that
yeah.
you've got.
And I think Reggie's right, doing just the right thing now, because obviously he's been up and down for the past few months, but he's just flown out to, I think it's Tenerife Top Training maybe, or Lanzarote perhaps, but he's just flown out into the sunshine for 4 or 5 weeks before semi-finals because he knows nobody can mess around with his time there. Nobody can play around with his, they can drag on in, come and do this, come and do this, come and do this, come and do that, wait for me here, wait for me there. He knows that he can get up in the morning and for just this period of, say, a month, he's going to be on his schedule for a change.
Yeah.
I mean, Amy used to be all over the place. She would be in a different city, like for half the week, and she'd be dropping this gym through training, dropping this gym through training, because her sponsor requirements are so high, and you just struggle to do it. So,
how do you stop yourself? And from the people that have done it well, and we haven't got to name any names, but like other people that haven't done it well, perhaps as well. How do you have that mental discipline not to become the busy fool? Because also, as much as there's obviously a colossal physical stress that you need to onboard, there is that unseen mental stress of just like some of the people you described there, of having to go all over the place, having to hit, sort of, adhere to all the demands of other people and, pander to what other people's plans and strategies and their business growth is all about, and having the discipline like to take yourself out of that and not be a busy fool.
I think that this is a really key one, and this is one that, say, my friend Chris Williamson is a podcast host, and the podcast's done incredibly well. Me and him talked about this a while ago, and it's a case of you have to put
Chris
your
Williamson.
priorities down. Yeah.
Modern Wisdom.
Yeah.
How do you know Chris?
We drove 2,500 miles around America together. Yeah.
Small world. But yeah, Chris is absolutely crushing the shit out of life at the minute. It appears from the external. Of course, I'm sure everything's not easy, and I'm sure it has challenges. But
no, he's pretty much crushing the shit out of life. No,
okay.
I'll be seeing him. I'm seeing him next week in Austin. Yeah,
Wonderful.
We'll go and catch up.
This is a nice little warm up then, because you will smash it next week.
No, but the thing that he said years ago, and we both agreed on, is that the honesty of your priorities is the key. And when you can write down, and you have to write them down, you have to be able to look at them in the face and say them out loud and say, these are my priorities. And when you put those priorities down, if the thing doesn't meet that list, then it's not happening. And it has to be that way, because even with friendships, like I know how important Chris's podcast is and doing his research is, and then fitting his health, his personal health is, and his rehab he's had more injuries than you can possibly imagine. But the recent one was he's snapping his Achilles. So for him, is genuinely, you can send him a message and that message he will get back to me. If he doesn't get back to me for 3 or 4 hours, that's because I know his priorities. If he has a podcast that needs researching for, he will be doing that research. He has body work that he needs to do every day because his training means a ton to him. And if he doesn't put that in that priority, it won't get done. Then after that, he's got literally his day-to-day shit that needs to take care of his life, because he likes a clean place to live and a tidy place to work from, and that comes up next. And now he'll have a list. Now, coming down that list, his friendships are still quite high on that list, but their friendships still come after his focus. It's on what he needs to get done to make himself satisfied with the life that he's living. And I find that when it comes to training, I think Zach George did this incredibly well and has it for a long time. Is Zach made being the best athlete he could possibly be his number one priority. And I remember in lockdown, he spoke to my members about this, and he was like, even resting, even his rest periods are something that people look at jealously. And he said you wouldn't be jealous if you had to do it, because he used to get up, have a good breakfast, go to the gym for his morning session. Then he'd come off his morning session and eat. And then he'd do a little bit of admin on the computer. But then he'd lie down and he'd say, I'll always take about an hour and a half, lay down or whatever it was, remember he said at the time. And he said, I don't want to. I want to go to the coffee shop with the boys. I want to go and chat with the lads. I want to put something on the telly. I want to get on the phone to my missus. I want to play on a game. I want to do whatever. And he's like, but instead, I have to force myself to get horizontal, clear my mind and try and sleep, because the best thing I can do right now for my performance is to do that. And he's like, that phone's buzzing and that phone's ringing and I'm desperate to pick it up. But that is not my task right now. My task is to be the best athlete in the world. And as a result, I have to prioritize this time to being horizontal. So he's like, if somebody phones me, and equally like he was saying about weddings and christenings and parties and birthdays, Zach isn't coming because Zach's going to bed. And Zach going to bed, you think is, Zach, can't you just not go to bed and just come into my evening do, or come and do this? No, why? Because my number one priority, and I've written it down, is to become the best athlete I can possibly be. And I will not allow this function or any other function to get in the way of that goal.
Yeah.
And that level of
that's
honesty,
healthy selfishness as well. People say selfish and it has negative connotations to it. But if you don't have a plan for yourself, I always say you're fitting somebody else's plan. And guess what they've got planned for you? Fuck all. Well, not because they're horrible, not because they're malicious, because they've got their life as well.
But it's resentfulness. Like if I know that those two people I just named, Zach and Chris, are unusual characters, but they're also unusually successful. Yeah. And I also know that if Chris compromised on answering the phone, on doing his messages, and doing social media and the rest of it, and then didn't get what he wanted, he would resent us for it. He'd resent us for the messages we sent him. He'd resent himself for the times that he did what he didn't want to. Knew he shouldn't have been doing. And as a result, the gulf between friendship would grow, because resent would sit in the middle, where he knew he had something that was more important to him that he did not do. And I won't be a part of that. I'm happy to be patient.
That's difficult for most people, though, because we are confined to our own perspective, and we fill in the blanks and we go, Rich is not getting back to me because he's a dick, because he's just changed, whatever that means. You know, he hates me now. He's all about himself, whatever. Chris really articulated it really well in a couple of his recent episodes, actually, where he talks about choosing your regrets. And he said personally himself, is like, I'm going to go hard on trying to progress the podcast over this next year. And in doing so, I'm going to accept that just maintaining or even slightly stepping back ever so slightly on some of my physical disciplines, I accept that my muscle tone and my weight gain, I'm going to accept 5% gain or loss in those areas, because this is my priority.
For sure. But so what it comes to is this, is that I think that for me, for example, Sky, my other half, at the moment, she wants to do more jiu-jitsu, and by more jiu-jitsu, she wants to go all in and train twice a day, 6 days a week, to see how far she can go down that rabbit hole. And she wants to be the best athlete she possibly can be. That means that we're not going to be eating tea together every night of the week. That means we're not going to be holding hand on the sofa and doing this and that. That means that we can't do other stuff together. That means we take flexibility about the system in taking trips and going places and doing stuff. That means I'm going to spend more time on my own. I would rather say I'll accept some of those discomforts that I don't really want. I'd prefer if you didn't go and do that. I'd prefer if you were with me and doing this instead. But I will not be the source of resentment for when she doesn't get what she wants.
Because
because
also,
that,
what's the end of that spectrum is you have a sterile partner who has no passions and no drive themselves, which you
yeah,
wouldn't be attracted to. If you
no,
sterilize
exactly.
that entire person, they'd never, they wouldn't be who you
No.
wanted to be.
And we have to give things up. We have to sacrifice things to get other things. And that maths is simple. It's brutal.
It's
It's
brutal.
absolutely brutal,
It comes
but
back
it's
to what you were
simple.
saying
I mean,
during
I
that
don't
presentation
drink.
in the room. It's not personal. It's I am making
No,
this decision, and as a result of that, in non-emotional decision, you don't play a part in Friday anymore because I'm doing this on Friday, and that doesn't involve you, and that's not malicious. It's
exactly.
just
No,
that's so
it's
fucking so
brutal.
important, man. Yeah, I know, but it's like it's almost beautifully innocent as well. And it's because if a child did that, we'd just be like, oh well, that's fine because so and so is really passionate about this. But then when you become an adult, you almost expect people to say, no, you should sacrifice more of your shit and do all the things that I want to do. And you're like, no, but I'm a person as well.
But sacrifice. Oh, here's the one that I know you'll probably agree with me on. I know a lot of my friends agree with me on. I don't really drink. I pretty much don't drink at all. You
I haven't
may see
drank
me
in
pick up a
15
beer to
years.
celebrate.
Yeah.
Well, you may see me pick up a drink to say congratulations on a wedding or something like that. But
Mm.
it's very, 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 very rare. And one of the reasons is because when you're looking for things, so I want to train. I also want to be the fire service. I also want to run a gym. I also want to be a good father to my son and a good boyfriend to my girlfriend. To fit all that in, I recognise that drinking took up a lot of my time in the sense of the actual night itself, then the fatigue that it causes, and then the hangover that it causes.
Yeah.
So some people be like, "Oh, but I really enjoy drink." It's not actually the drink that I miss. It's the friendship and the camaraderie I miss when I had a drink. So
Mm.
when I go to a wedding and I have 5 or 6 beers, I dance a bit more. I sing a little bit more. I wrap my arms around my mates. We giggle and we have fun because we're a bit pissed and it's all
Yeah,
really
yeah,
great.
yeah,
And
yeah.
honestly, that is real bonding time, real friendship time that I used to have. Now I don't drink. You're in the not drinking club. You're in the drivers club. And people don't necessarily loosen up the same, and you don't loosen up the same. I'll be absolutely honest.
Yeah.
I'm not the same. And then I don't get the same sense of fun, and then I kind of want to call the night early anyway because everyone's a bit drunk now and they're a bit annoying. So then these events, so the sacrifice isn't just the alcohol. The sacrifice is the experience I would have with my buddies and
Mm.
the perhaps the memory of how that event would be to me. If I
Yeah.
was pissed, it'd probably be a little bit more golden than me
Mm.
laughing at everyone because they're just hammered. So the sacrifice is actually quite a lot there.
Yeah.
But in return, I get the ability to do something the next day, to be a
Mm.
little bit,
Well,
wake a
it's
little bit
perceived
earlier,
to
to
be a
get stuff
lot
done.
in the closed framework of that one evening. But
Yeah,
then if you can, you extrapolate that behavior outwards, and again, it echoes back to what Chris says about choosing your regrets. It's like I'm having this one isolated regret in the evening of what I perceive I'm losing from that one situation. But then when I extrapolate that regret and or behavioral change out over the next week, year, 10 years, you are creating a sustainable model that you can keep doing till you're looking out your window and seeing what your dad's doing. You can be still doing that
honestly,
in 30 years. Whereas with the greatest of respect to some of your friends, and it's not right or wrong, it's just a different approach. Will they have that same opportunity? Likely not.
this is it. I've taken out for me. If I have advice to anybody, it'd be start with the simple ones. If you want to fit a lot into your day, you're going to need to find some time. And the simple thing you can do to find some time is to start saying no to just a handful of things that give you
Mm.
loads of time back. Beer is a time robber in my opinion. It just takes
Yeah,
time off
yeah,
me
yeah.
straight away. But then if I start looking at, for example, like you have to sacrifice a level of friendships. If you know what I mean,
Yeah.
you have to sacrifice a level of intimate certain
You
friendships.
have to
You can't
sacrifice
be
friendships that people are high maintenance. Like even just from our first conversation now, I know if I don't see you for a year and we turn up at your gym or I see you wherever, hopefully maybe I see you in Austin. I don't know, but it's like I know I could have an amazing evening with you, or we could go and climb a mountain or go on whatever. But we don't
yeah.
expect that Rich is going to message me in 3 days to see how I'm doing.
Exactly. This is exactly it. I don't maintain some of my friendships now on a daily basis anymore
Fucking hell,
because it
not
was
even a
taking up
weekly
hours of
basis.
my day. It's taking up
Yeah.
hours of my day, and I don't drink anymore because that takes up this, and I don't get. And before you know it, there is time to get back, left, right, and center,
Mm.
and that's how you fit so much in. But people, when they message me on Instagram and say like, "How do you do X so much in?" You have to remember that like I know it sounds really Goggins that we all get the same 24 hours in a day, but we do. But I'm a little bit more brutal about my priorities. And
Mm.
I look my friends and my family in the eye when I explain them, and there will be regrets. There will be experiences missed. But at the same time, they're in the chase of something that I'm clear about the way that I want. And it is what it is. I mean, for example, this year, a very difficult one in the past 12 months, was accepting that Samson had to come to the gym with me, my son. My son's 6. For the first probably 3 or 4 years of his life, I didn't really let him come inside of my gritstone. The reason being is I didn't see a period where he would, why should he have to be at my job? Why should he have to come with me to work? Like, I didn't go to work with my dad when he was a kid. Like, he went to work and he made time for me outside of that. So I did the same thing. If it was a day with Samson, there's no requirement for him to be inside my gym at Gritstone.
Yeah.
However, as things progressed, it got to a point where to fit my training in and to fit some hours in, I had to make a sacrifice somewhere, and I had to make a difficult choice, which was to say there were periods of time where Samson's going to have to come in the gym for a couple of hours because Dad needs to train, and that's part of life. And I remember it was my dad that spoke to me about that, and he said to me, "You probably don't remember this, but there were times when you put your pajamas on, we put you in a dressing gown and your slippers, I put you in the car, and I drove you to a rugby training session at 8 p.m. at night, and I knew you should be in bed, but you sat there with a Game Boy and a ham sandwich in your pajamas because Dad trained from 8 till 9 p.m. and then you fell asleep in the car on the way back, and I put you in bed." And my dad's absolutely clear on this. I recognize that that's not ideal. I recognize that wasn't the best thing for you, but your dad needed to play rugby because that was part of his identity. That's part of who I am and who I want to be. So he said, "Yeah."
But it speaks volumes about the fact that you are making that a conscious decision as well, though, because some people will go, "Well, what about Rich? I mean, you just took your kids, whatever, it's fine. Everybody takes kids to it." But you are really giving that some thought around, what behavior am I accepting here? So I'm starting this behavior, and am I acknowledging it? Am I accommodating for that? Am I seeing the impact that I might have on my son? And how can I do it in the healthiest possible way? Help him understand what's going on, but then also put time aside somewhere else potentially. Because some people will just start arbitrarily sacrificing things without really or making an adaptation without really thinking about the adaptation that they are making and the consequence of that.
You have to weigh these things up. If I'm going to be happy, if I'm going to be genuinely satisfied on a day-to-day basis, for me, like, I have to know the choices that I'm making and why I'm making them, because then I can look them in the face and I can go to sleep. Yeah. For me, the next job, I mean, probably the last thing I'll probably say at the moment is my next job in the next couple of days is I haven't had a good really assessment of where I'm at for ages. Things are going really well, but at the moment we're kind of off plan a little bit, if you know what I mean. Okay. So genuinely, we've talked to me and Sky was saying this the other day, and I've got my diary out. I need to sit down and have a little review again, just for this next 6 to 12 months. What is it I'm trying to achieve? What do I want? So what do I genuinely want for Gritstone? And dig into myself. What do I want for Gritstone to look like in 6 to 12 months? In terms of my training, so I've got jiu-jitsu and CrossFit. I just surprised myself with a really great CrossFit Open. Does that change what I want from my
I was about to ask you earlier about the jiu-jitsu aspect and how much of that in your own consciousness have you done because it's something you wanted to do, or does it sustain a closeness between you and your partner and it's something you can do together? But also, me with all of my injuries and pec tears and patella tears and back, jiu-jitsu scares me. So I'm like, if something slips up there and has a potential unintended cost to what I agreed were my original priorities, but also I could then convince myself not to do it. And there's a certain internal bias that's happening there as well.
So I think this year, what was in the world, I finished the Open 37th in the world in my category. Top 30 go to semi-finals, and then the top, I think it's 15 go to the games.
Yeah.
I would like to go to the games, and I said it out loud. I will not stop CrossFit until I go to the games. It's hard, but that's a statement I've made out loud, and I live by that. I will go to the games.
But in that same mindset, you've actively engaged with BJJ now, which is an unknown.
I've done CrossFit now for, I would say, like 12 years, probably 10 years, seriously. 8 years only in the gym. For the first couple of years, there were times when I slept at Gritstone because it meant so much to me. I have intensely pursued that goal. I'm 38 now, so in my category, between 35 plus to 40, 35 to 40, I'm in the last couple of years, and it's highly unlikely that I would qualify for the games in that category. I have Rich Froning in my category now, Dan Bailey, these kind of guys, 5 times CrossFit Games winner in my category. It's going to be hard to qualify. But also, statistically looking back, because I am a Aspergers, I have gone through the numbers, statistically looking back, qualifying in the last 2 years is incredibly difficult. So it looks unlikely that I would be able to make it. That being said, my first year at 40 and my second year at 40 are my most likely next opportunities.
Yes.
To stay motivated, I could spend this next 2 years still training twice a day at my CrossFit gym, absolutely pounding out workouts because I love it. But we have to then expect that I'll be 14 years deep, and then I need to try and get to the games.
Yeah.
It seemed to me like this was a wonderful opportunity I had in front of me after over a decade to take a little tactical pause in my CrossFit journey. And rather than train because I'm constantly trying to win something and constantly trying to be at the top of something, and I mean literally hurting myself every day. I used to crawl up the stairs and can't tell you how bad it was. Sky would probably tell you in a different interview, but it's difficult to do what I did. And then what I thought was I'll take an 18-month tactical pause and I'll just do something different. I'll just free my mind of the pursuit of this CrossFit journey just for a period of time, so that in the run up to being 40, I'll go back in with maybe a 7 or 8 month running, and I'll go back to what I did before: 2 or 3 workouts a day, 6 days a week, the food, the sleep, the sacrifice, and I will go to the games when I turn 40. So BJJ came in because Sky's excellent at BJJ, and it's something I wanted to share with her, exactly like you said. That's something I like to do. I missed playing rugby and the physicality, so BJJ meets that. And then, honestly, it was supposed to just be a hobby. And then a guy gave me a black eye, and then it stopped being a hobby. And and then I started training like 6 times a week, and like 6 times a week. And now we're going to Austin to train in Austin with B team and stuff. And I went to my first comp, and then I signed up for my second comp, and then my third comp, and I just can't help
that's
it.
Incredible. But also you've afforded yourself a great structure in life financially as well to enable you to do that, which is wonderful, because it's still, especially as challenging economically as things are for people these days, that in itself is a wonderful example of discipline. Once again, choosing what your priorities are and not being frivolous, both with time, but also with money. And I think that's an important and uncomfortable thing to maybe discuss for a second, because that's where a lot of people do limit their lives through silly.
It is uncomfortable.
Yeah,
I suppose it is uncomfortable, but to be fair, I make almost as much money from my other areas as I do from the fire service. So it's quite, it'd be wrong to say like, oh, I just do these things. No, financially I'm secure enough that I basically double my wage.
Yeah,
most months.
It's important to talk about that, because otherwise we paint an illusion for people that, hey, you can do all of this. You can, and of course you can, but you do have to have these other disciplines and structures in your life. You can't just fumble into it and expect to allow yourself the same opportunities.
But that's also work that not everybody wants to do. Not everybody wants to spend their days off doing work. Not everyone wants to spend their days off. I mean, the number of times we've been here on a Sunday night and I've got my computer out and I'm programming, or I'm doing social media posts at the gym, or I'm filming my training, or I'm editing stuff, or I'm speaking to sponsors, or I'm looking at my next competition. There are things that have to be done that to me I find fun and engaging, and they're part of a life that I want to live. And I've curated my life so that my other incomes are incomes that I enjoy making.
Yeah. That's exactly what I'm trying to develop with the podcast. It's like there's an interesting Rubik's Cube in front of me, and I keep turning it over and turning it around and going, how can I make this thing better? Because like you said about the emergency services and the RAF and other aspects, I know the outcome of it is really beneficial to people. Like, demonstrating to the world that there's this firefighter Ricky that also has this beautiful eclectic life. I think having a conversation with him and putting that out there to the world is a really important thing in it, living there eternally, because people that we don't know that will listen to this in 5 years will be incredibly inspired by your story. So I'm like, this is an interesting Rubik's Cube to get better at, but that's why I stay there for hours at night for almost no financial reward, because I'm like, I know there's a thing here, and it has grown exponentially over the past 3 years that we've been doing it. But like Chris did it for 6-7 years. Not very successfully, but doing exactly what I know I need to do. Turn the Rubik's Cube around and keep going inside it and outside it, and move one slot and then put it back on and spin it and then go.
I remember when Chris's podcast would get a couple of thousand listens, and it was a really big deal. And I remember when a couple of thousand listens to Chris, like he would send me a message, please repost this podcast up for me. Please repost this podcast for me. Please listen to this and tell me what you think about this. Please tell me this. These days, that's what I'm saying, is like your friendships change and things change. That's perfect. But I remember the days when literally you'd get a message, please listen to this podcast, and if you like it, will you post it for me? I'd be like, of course I will, mate. But that was when he was developing and learning. And these days, just on another level. Yeah, he's got 800,000 YouTube subscribers now. So I remember when there were 2,000 listens, and that was a really big deal. And now 800,000 people are subscribed just to one of these channels. But nobody starts that way. And this is the bit that I get incredibly frustrated, whether it's in training because you want to be elite levels of fitness, whether it's in say intelligence because you want to be good at it.
Yeah.
And I can't comment on the fire service because I don't know yet. I'm still learning. But the thing that I would say to everybody is that it's not talent that defines your outcome. It's 90% of it is persistence.
Mm-hmm.
It's the idea to not be dissuaded from your goal.
Yeah.
Your goal may change. So in doing this podcast, I know I'm being reaching out in here, but in doing this podcast, the skills that you acquire mean that you can end up, I don't know, maybe one day someone approaches you and say, look, we're just looking, you've got emergency service experience, you've been out to these places. We're looking for a correspondent to go to talk with ITN on, I don't know, on scenes of emergencies or out at sea or in these places. You've got the requisite physical skills to make yourself at home in these difficult situations. But also we've seen you've got the communication skills to deliver on a given topic. Do you think you might look at, so you might end up, I don't know, you could end up working for ITN as a correspondent. Why? Because this podcast is nurturing the skills that you want, which is to speak and affect people with outcomes. And who knows where that might go. And the only answer to that is to persistence. And to find out.
You're so fucking right, mate. And I bet you see it all the time, both with BJJ now, but also with CrossFit. How many people don't come past the third workout because they were embarrassed? I'm an elite level sprinter and I've just looked stupid in a CrossFit class. Or like with this, I'm like, so many people won't be great because they're not happy to be good. Do you know what I mean? They're like, I'm either great or I'm not doing it at all. And I'm like, no. You just need to get used to being shit repeatedly for a long time. And I always use, and I'm sure Chris would probably say the same. It's like, I always call the podcast learning out loud because I'll fumble through this. I'll interrupt Rich, and then I'll be frustrated when I listen back to the edit, and I'll catch him with a loose elbow, and I'll step on his toe, and then eventually maybe I'll get a little bit better. I'm sure I will, and that's what it's about. But you've got to keep showing up. It's just got consistency. You know what I mean? Most people say, I had a shit day Friday, I'm not coming again. You'll go, I had a shit day Friday, see you Saturday. Do you know what I mean? And that's the difference.
That's exactly it. That is exactly it. And I think that there's a thing that Chris once said, that there is a time and a place where volume beats quality.
Yes.
Okay. And the time and a place where volume beats quality. And that's interesting to me because I really believe this in CrossFit where, well, I'm not saying volume is in like just train like 7 hours a day. What I'm trying to say is if you turn up the 5 or 6 days a week, because you had a bad workout, it doesn't deter you. Those hours add up over time. And I think with podcasting, you will have better episodes and less good episodes. But it doesn't matter. It shouldn't dissuade you from keep recording those episodes, keep refining those skills. The people that listen to this podcast, say, for example, you want a side hustle, you want a side business, you want to make side money. That is something that I am quite successful at. But also I'm persistent in that I keep going for it. And don't get me wrong. Sometimes some people say like, you've got to, you're flogging a dead horse or something like that. But more often than not, people aren't. You're not. You're not even near the end of the journey. You're not even near the end of the thing. You haven't pursued every facet of this idea yet. And you haven't allowed the adaptations to come and flow with them. Giving up is the easiest way to fail. Because failure is actually pretty hard to achieve. I'm not going to lie. Actual failure. Look at the fire service. Say when it comes to me in my apprenticeship, there are many, if we're honest with ourselves, I might be the world's worst recruit. There are many points at which I could fail and repeatedly fail and still end up in 10 years' time a decent firefighter.
100%.
The point is the people that just continually address their failures and then relearn and pass. You know how it is. It's bloody hard to fail.
Yeah. Oh, it is. So, and that's what people forget. They've lowered the bar. The pass mark is like 60% in some stuff.
Exactly.
And you're like, you can fucking get it. You will get it.
So if you were a little kid growing up and all you dreamed of was being a firefighter, but you have not been born with the talent that would lead you, you could still be a firefighter if you just said, "Oh, this is my dream, and I will learn, and I will go home and study." You could fail, but the endearing quality of persistence could still make you one day the kind of firefighter that I want to be in a fireground with.
And people think they've tried lots of things. They go, "Oh, I've tried everything, Pete. Really, everything?" Well, I mean, thousands. You've tried thousands of things. Name me 10. Okay, I've tried these 5 things 4 times and they've not worked. Okay, so that's the truth there. Then you've tried these things. You've tried fucking everything.
that is honestly, I cannot relate hard enough again to that statement. That is exactly what I hear. Like nutrition, people have nutrition problems. Are like, I've done everything.
You haven't.
You haven't. Have you tried one thing persistently? Nutrition especially. I've tried 10 different diets. Have you tried one for a long enough time that it worked? It's so the same true with everything. There's a point at which I've said this. I think I used to say this in quotes on my Instagram all the time. But I love the wonderful feeling of inevitability. And I say it as a competitor in this sense, usually, I'm going to win. I've looked at athletes that are more talented than me, that are more gifted than me, that were born with more than me. And I look at them and think, I'm going to beat you. The inevitability that I'm going to beat you. Why? I want it more. I will do it the days that you don't want to do it. I will show up and I will apply my focus and my attention in ways that you are not ready to meet. And God gave you everything. And the smile I have on my face, knowing that I will still win, is important, because I'm going to win with the one thing that I do have. It's fucking turning up with everything I have. And I love it. It lights me up. You can hear in my voice. It lights me up. The inevitability of what I will achieve when I apply myself. And I think that that's a feeling that gives me power, because it should give everybody power. Because
that inevitability is like taking people into deep water and drowning them, isn't it?
You don't have to rely on gifts. You don't have to rely on talent. All you have to have is the desire, and then the unwavering discipline to just pursue it relentlessly and smiling knowledgeably that almost everything will come in time. And time's on your side. Especially in jiu-jitsu, especially what I've learned in jiu-jitsu is you can be as athletic as you want, but that black belt is not coming until you give that sufficient time. But I tell you what, it is coming. It is coming.
Yeah. It's that mindset though, isn't it? I'd be remiss, and when I speak about mindset there, because I want to be respectful of your time. I know you've got bits to do today, but we've spoke about the so many powerful aspects and beneficial aspects of this mindset and of this approach. But I'd be remiss if we didn't then talk about the counter cost sometimes of where both of us, myself as a recovered addict, where sometimes we can over-index on those aspects. And before we came on, I was referring to your Instagram page, and there's that favorites aspect where it says losing my shit. Just to give that vulnerability and that honesty to people, not to leave them in a puddle of shit, because I know we're left out of it at the end as well. And we're talking today in a position where you're in a much more secure mindset. But take us, if you can, for a minute to those moments where it has over-indexed.
I had depression. I got to the point where my relationship with Samson's mum failed. And at some point during that process, it started months before, things just started to unravel for me in my head. I remember we had a burglary where burglars climbed in through my son's bedroom window when he was only about 6 months old. They must have climbed over his cot, and they took a lot of our stuff. And that was quite jarring as an experience. The fear I had for my son that something could have happened was very, very, very deep rooted then. And then they took a lot of our stuff, and the insurance wouldn't cover it. So then I had to find about £15,000 to replace everything. And then we were living in an area that I'd never lived before. I know it sounds silly, but the lack of familiarity in that place and the people around me led me to be kind of afraid of the situation. And then the relationship was strained, and we were breaking up. And then we broke up, and I ended up in the doctor's surgery in Mosley, just down the road. And he came in and said, "What's the problem?" And I just descended into tears. I couldn't actually express. A bit of a blubbering mess. There were so many things. It felt the sky had fallen down. I was a little chick with the sky that's fallen down, and immediately diagnosed me with depression and quite severe anxiety. And a few things, I think, like military experiences, obviously the house experiences, the relationship experiences, all came together in this one moment to create this difficulty for me. I suppose all I had was each day and trying to figure out what I was going to do with the hours before going back to sleep again, or trying to get back to sleep again. The worst it got was just on one occasion when I was driving somewhere from point A to point B, and I had a consideration of what might happen if I just drove my vehicle into the side of a bridge and I just wasn't here anymore. I considered it for I don't know how long I considered it for. During those experiences where you're driving, but you're not sure how long you've driven for. And I was driving, and by the time I came round to it, it shocked me. It immediately shocked me. I was thinking it 1 minute as a realistic possibility, and then the next minute I was thinking, what is happening inside your head? This isn't right. Like, you have a son, you have a son to take care of. You have you have to be here. Like, you can't go anywhere. And that feeling that I didn't want to be here, but I have to, is probably one of the most important feelings I've ever had in my life. Like, I want to. So I wasn't at rock bottom, let's suppose. And some people don't have that feeling, which I suppose is what is very important to me. I'm very grateful for. I have something to be here for.
And that purpose,
my son. And then, sorry, just a second, a bit emotional, but that was not a nice day. But then, subsequent to that, obviously, I kind of engaged with the antidepressants and the anti-anxiety tablets, and then a little bit of counselling, and I engaged with a lot of good processes to try and just literally get myself a bit more level in my thinking and trying to understand what were healthy thoughts and what were unhealthy thoughts, which was using a journal and using a diary and speaking to my friends. And then I'm very lucky to have my mum, dad, and my sister who are very good communicators and very empathetic, I think is the right phrase, and understanding and caring. And they helped me realize which thoughts were healthy and not healthy. Because I suppose for a while you don't know yourself, do you really?
No.
You don't realize how unhealthy these ideas are.
You can't see the picture when you're in the frame.
Or hurt someone else.
You're so inside your own head.
And then I started to get better. And then I think this is going to sound obviously incredibly, you know what I'm like by now, putting a few systems in place which helped me start to get better. So I remember my dad saying to me one day, and I remember I bought an entire crate of beer. I think my ex had taken my son off me for a short period of time. I bought an entire crate of lager, and I sat on the steps of my house, and he said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm going to drink this entire crate of lager, and I'm going to pass out, hopefully, and I won't be conscious anymore, so it doesn't matter." And my dad said, he was incredibly angry. He was like, "You're not." And I said, "I am." And he tried to explain why. I said to him, "I just don't want to be conscious, Dad, and I can't sleep. I can't do anything else, and I can't go anywhere. I can't leave these problems. If I go for a walk, the problems remain with me. The turbulence is in here. And the only thing I can think of is I'm going to drink this entire crate of lager until I'm not conscious anymore. And that's the only thing I can possibly have the idea for." And my dad was so angry and upset about that situation. Not at me, but about the situation.
Yeah.
But we got through those few days. And then what he started to do is instead giving me little tasks. All I want you to do, son, tomorrow is get up, have a shower, make your bed, and then come and have breakfast with me. And that's the only thing he'd ask me to do. And I'd say, "I don't want to." He said, "I'll give a fuck what you want to do. All I would like you to do, I'm your father, I'm asking you to do, is get up, have a shower, make your bed, and come and have breakfast with me at 8:30. That's all I'm asking you to do. That's all I want you to do."
Mate, even though that was your dad, that is a life-saving action for people to do. And I would just, sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to interrupt because I would pause just there and say to people, if you ask somebody to do that, you may be saving their life. It may seem like fuck all to you. You're like, well, I'm getting up anyway, and if they turn up for breakfast, they do what they don't. But that is a huge structural trigger in people's morning. Like, I've just set their day up for I've sent them in a different direction. Their whole day is going to go in a different direction because of that thing. But sorry, carry on. But it's so important.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more. It's fundamental to my living and breathing at that point. And then, for example, my mum I'd have a Samson day, and my mum would say, "What are you doing with Samson today?" And I'd say, "I hadn't thought." And then I'd start to fall into that sadness of, I don't even care about my son. I don't even know what we're going to do. And she'd give me a leaflet, and she'd say, "This park's open today." And I've made him a packed lunch, and I made you a packed lunch. Go to the park. So I'd pack up his pram and I'd pack up his stuff. I had all the money. I had all the time. I just couldn't do the basics of living. And I'd pack up the thing, and then I'd go to that park, and then I'd take him to see, I don't know, the farm animals at the park or whatever it was. And we'd walk around, and Mum had made us a packed lunch, and we'd eat a packed lunch. And then maybe I'd buy a football and we'd run around with a toddler trying to kick a football. But the point being is that would make me incredibly happy and satisfied, and I'd feel okay. Now, as the time got on and I got healthier, and I was reading more, and I was journaling more, and I was engaging with the process of the antidepressants, and my friendships and things grew, it got to the point where I could start to plan my own things, and I could start to see the light a little bit more, and the days were a little bit brighter. And before you know it, this momentum starts to roll up where I'm getting myself up, I'm looking after myself, I'm eating a bit better, I'm fitting a little bit of training in, I'm thinking of things that I'd like to do with myself. And can you see that that's not depression? That is incredible wellness. Incredible wellness is where you genuinely are waking up a day and you're looking ahead and you're thinking of all the things you could do and not all the things you can't do. And
no, mate, it's a great mindset switch. If you look for bad stuff, if you look for bad shit, it's everywhere. You'll find it. There's always reasons not to get up in the morning. There's always reasons not to bother doing the thing. That's the pessimist mindset. But you've said it in so many aspects there. It's like, yeah, the pessimists are usually right more than the optimists. But the optimists are happier and they're more successful. They're always swinging for the fence. They might miss most of the time, but they crack one every couple of days and it fucking soars.
Yeah, it does. It does. And, all you've got to do is roll an okay day into an all right day, into a decent day, into a good day, into a very good day. And those days add up and add up and up. And you start to prove to yourself that you can be a good person, a functional person, a happy person. And I've said this before, like, I'm going to get emotional saying I'm so sorry. I do this every time. But is anybody listening who feels that way? I know what it feels like to be in a really dark world. Like, it makes me sad that I ever felt that way, because I felt there was no escape from it. And I felt that, like, even once I had that one feeling that I didn't even want to be here. And I promise you, like, I couldn't imagine back then how happy my life would be right now. If
Yeah.
I knew back then, this is what depression is. Depression is a place where you can't imagine a life like it might be today.
Mm.
So if you've been diagnosed with depression or you have depression, recognize that a fundamental component of that is that you can't see how good it is yet, but it is. And I'm telling you, because I know I've been there.
Yeah.
I've never been happier in my life, and I never imagined the possibility this could exist. So if you're listening and you feel that way, just trust me for 1 second.
Mate, it takes me right
is on the other
back
side.
to the beginning of our conversation with Man's Search for Meaning, Mein Kampf. You know, when
Yeah,
you're in that valley of depression, it's because you can't imagine you're imagining a future that doesn't contain you. Whereas if you can just imagine, God, I'll tell you what, when I look back on this in 2 years, fucking hell, this is really going to stand out. And if you're even framing the wording as that way, this is going to be something I look back on and go, this was really fucking rough. But even in saying that, you're unconsciously saying, I am going to look back on this, because I am going to look back on this in the future where I am in existence upon this time where I was really struggling. And that may seem like a subtle switch for people, but it's so important that
it's so important.
I'm going to look back on this as something that was really fucking hard. This will be one of the things,
you
know, where your ass is scraping, like when the aeroplane just takes off and it's like going, and it's just fucking hitting the ground. And you're like, oh yeah, fuck, I'm a bit low in altitude here and I'm scraping, but I'm going to look back on this at 30,000 feet and go, fucking hell, do you remember when we were scraping our ass? I'll tell you, that was twitchy for a minute there, but you are going to be there again. And then at some point you'll dip and go an altitude.
You will, and it's a great experience to have. And I think that I wouldn't wish it on anybody. I wouldn't have wished this to go through this myself. You know, it's not one of those things I'm grateful for. I can't say I can. So a lot of people I think could say that. I think some people will lie and deliver that cliche. But for me personally, I would not wish depression on anybody. That being said, the ability to look back on it is a gift I would now not exchange to be where I am. And if that can be someone's motivation, then it really should be.
It widens your spectrum, doesn't it? Because your spectrum now includes the bit where I was going to drive into the bridge. And I know where I am now in comparison to that spectrum. If your spectrum's only, Joe Rogan always says it, the worst thing that's ever happened to you is the worst thing that's ever happened to you. So for you, that is where your spectrum starts at 0. But other people, they're no better or worse, but their spectrum is just wider because their 0 is way beyond where their 0 is your minus 30. Do you know what I mean? You never envisaged that
I think,
was part of it.
On Instagram, I do have to try and post things more regularly. I'm aware that I have to post things more regularly about mental health, because I realize that people say Instagram is rose tinted glasses, it's the highlights, and to an extent, it really is. But I'm only living the life I'm living today, and I try and just post the thoughts of the day that I am living. It just so happens there are a lot of happy days these days, and that's the way it is. What I don't want to become is a old and tired cliche where I basically just roll out my old mental health problems for likes and follows, because I'm vastly more conscious on my social media that I don't want to become just literally exactly that, a person who is now swapping depression for likes. That isn't the situation. And so I don't talk about it regularly because I don't know how yet to talk about it regularly. But I do put posts up, and there's a couple on there that I one specifically that I've pinned to the top of my feed. I'm not saying this isn't a go and like and follow my page, but this is genuinely, if you think about depression and you want to have a read about it for 2 minutes, the first post on my Instagram is one that you could read, and you can see my face, you can see where I was, and you can see where I am now. And it might be something that just gives you a little bit of motivation and positivity to think about stepping through it. And I will, over the coming weeks, months, and years, figure out how to talk about that experience so that it can be relevant and it can be useful without being, what can I say? I just think it's sad.
Depression
I know some people
porn.
who do it. Depression porn. That's exactly it. I will not have that.
Do you know what? Unfortunately, because of the complexity and the fragility of the subject, and you are actually already doing it, I just don't think you know you're doing it. The best way to do it, in obviously my mental, I would say, is bias. I always think that podcasting is the purest form of social media because it allows for context. When someone will go on and listen to us talking for 2 hours, they won't just hear the one post 30-second depression porn. They will see that as it does exist as just simply part of Richard's life. It's just something that occurred at one point. He had a peak, he had a valley, he had a peak, and that landscape continues through his entire life. I don't think it's possible, and I'm sure some people try, but like you say, when they do then try, sometimes it does just become depression porn on Instagram. So
Yeah.
I think the best way to do it is, if we say this subject is important, then let's give it that time, and let's put it into conversations. And this is not a 14-hour audio book, it's sometimes it's a 30-minute podcast, sometimes it's a whatever. I think that is the sphere in which these conversations should exist, because people can understand the context of what that is. Because some of your posts on depression have been extremely powerful, but people don't know that that's just part of your journey, and that you don't know what the viewer takes off from that. They might go, "Oh, this was the last days of this person's life," or they don't know that it was actually 6 years ago, and this is where we are now. It's hard. I don't know if it is possible to do it in the very confined context that we now frame social media in. It's very difficult.
I'm definitely, I'm gonna write a post, and I'm gonna put depression porn at the top. I've never heard that phrase, but it's exactly what I feel it can be like, and it's exactly what I'm trying to avoid. But you're right. This podcast form, I really enjoy speaking to you, and I think that in speaking to you also, it clears my thoughts and how I feel about stuff, as much as hopefully it helps other people do the same. Like, these conversations make me even more clear about what I think and feel, and it makes me want to do more about it.
I love it. That's why I keep doing it. This is the biggest, and I'm sure Chris will agree when you see him in a few weeks, this is the biggest personal development thing I've ever had, because it forces you to reframe yourself, look at your own perspectives, be challenged publicly, and also just hear, when you listen back to stuff, you're like, how do I think I am coming across? What's my intended impact? What's my impact felt? By the listener, by the person. It's huge, man. And I've learned so much more about you. And I just want to thank you for being so incredibly generous with your time. You've given me 2 hours of what I know. And we both spoke about being structured and things like that. But that's important. You've said, look, I'm going to allocate this time to talking to Pete this morning. I'll learn whether or not that investment of my time was worth it. And then I'll do it again in 2 years' time with somebody else, or next week with Chris, or whatever it might be.
100% worth it. 100% worth it. And I think I really appreciate your time. I sometimes find myself still at this moment. I tell you what I am. I find myself still in that zone of I'm not a real firefighter yet. I'm not really in this service just yet. I'm sure in a couple of years' time, when the apprenticeship is done, I'll feel part of it. But I'm certainly glad that you asked me to come on, and I'm glad that we could talk about some other stuff, because in terms of the fire service, I am literally still a junior, still learning.
Hey,
and I'm very proud. I'm very proud to be part of the fire service, and I'm very proud to be a firefighter and be allowed to talk to you, certainly under the type of a podcast that it means a lot to me.
Proud to have you in the family, brother. Thank you so much for your time. Please send my love to the good lady. Send my love to Samson as well.
Yeah.
And have an amazing time next week, and I'll speak to you soon.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Firefighters podcast is put together to develop, inspire, and hopefully even motivate those individuals who have chosen to serve our communities and be part of the first responder family. It's brought to you by myself, operational firefighter Pete Wakefield. If you have enjoyed today's episode and you want to see the podcast continuing, please head over to our Patreon page, where you can support the ongoing efforts of the podcast. Please hit that follow, subscribe, or rate button on whatever platform you're listening to. Please support your emergency services responders, and thank you for listening.